Chapter 1102. When the crowd dispersed and the old man boarded the train again, Lightning flew into the cab through the rear window and landed quietly in the carriage. The old man stood in front of the console, looking down at the item in his hand motionlessly like a silent statue. Looking at his back, she wanted to say something to comfort him, but she did not know what to say. It wasn't until she touched the half-open window in hesitation that the man noticed her presence. "Ah, you're the little girl from the other day." The old man blinked in surprise. "My name is Lightning." Lightning could not help but take a step back. "Sorry, I see. You're here to comfort me, aren't you?" He suddenly grinned. "Oh, really, I'm not old enough to need a little girl to comfort me." "Sorry about that. But the ability of a witch is really convenient. I can go wherever I want." The old man did not look as sad as Lightning had imagined, which made her feel a little relieved. I'll knock first next time." "I'm not blaming you, child." The old man put down the folding table on the wall and wiped it with his sleeve. "Come, sit here. I'll pour you a cup of tea. This is the only thing that can be used to entertain people." Thank you." Lightning slowly walked to the table and sat down. When she got closer, she found that it was a Neverwinter ID card on the console. "My name is Brushere, or you can call me by my nickname, Mr. Loud Voice. The kids on the train often call me that." The old man brought a cup of hot tea to the table. "Did you attend the funeral?" Lightning nodded and then shook her head. "I just happened to fly over and watched for a while." "That means you didn't lose any friends. That's really good news." She clenched the cup. "Your son." "Ah, his name is Robert, the third son in the family. He died fighting for the artillery position," Brushere said calmly. "The battalion commander said he was very brave." "He is indeed very brave," Lightning said in a low voice. She had heard about the whole process of the battle from Sylvie. Without firepower support and the presence of the gods' punishment witches, it would have been impossible for a person to take such a step forward while facing the demons' spears without sufficient courage. In fact, Lao Sen used to be the most timid one. When he was mining in the mines, no matter how the foreman bullied him, he never dared to fight back. "He would only come back and complain to me," Brushere said with mixed feelings. "Do you find it strange that I don't look so sad?" The little girl was at a loss for words. "No, it doesn't matter," the old man comforted her. "Because I knew this day would come sooner or later. My third son and the other two sons all told me the same thing." "What did they say?" "They said that they wanted to protect Neverwinter, their hometown, and everything they had worked so hard to get." The old man took a sip of tea. "To be honest, I didn't understand at that time. I even asked why it was them and not others." Lightning was also wondering why. Brushere seemed to read her mind. Their answer was that others had already been sacrificed. Since the beginning of the militia's fight against the demonic beasts, many people have died. It was the same when we fought against the Duke of Ryan and the church. If everyone thought about why it was them and not others, we would still be living like livestock in the mines, the old man said. The old man said, "As long as it's a battle, there will inevitably be sacrifices. Whoever's turn is who's who. If no one is willing to go, there's no need to fight this battle. In the end, we'll still be at the mercy of the enemy," that's what they told me. "I don't know whether my three sons are right or not, but at least I'm sure that it's their own choice." He took a deep breath. "My children have all grown up. It's enough for me that they can walk on the path that they believe is right. Compared to eldest brother who died of a cold, third brother's name will be remembered by the army forever. What do I have to be sad about?" Lightning could not help but recall the words of the other party that night. They used to live like mice, both thin and cowardly, but since joining the army, it is as if they have changed inside and outside. This is also the reason why I am full of confidence in the First Army. A team composed of such people will not be easily defeated. So that's how it is. By the way, I still have to thank you." "Thank me?" Lightning was stunned. Of course, the old man smiled. Without your timely notification, the camp would have suffered greater losses. In a way, you also protected the First Army and my other son. I was wondering when I would meet you again. Maybe I would never see you again. I didn't expect you to appear right behind me. It's great to be able to thank me in person. After drinking the tea, Lightning waved goodbye to Broocher. She flew out of the carriage and saw the old man return to the control panel through the window. He grabbed the ID card and covered his face with his hands. Back in the residential area, Maggie was hovering in the air. As soon as she saw Lightning, she pounced on her. Where have you been, Koo? Why did you come back so late, Koo? Have you forgotten what's going to happen today? What is it? Today is the day that Lorgar is discharged from the hospital. Maggie folded her wings and landed on her head. Go to the medical center, Koo. Ah. Okay, I got it. Don't move around. Lightning held the pigeon and flew to the center of the camp. After the last night attack, the layout of Tower Station No. 1 had changed a lot. Looking down from the sky, except for the platform, the yard, and the sentry tower, the rest of the area was flat. Functional buildings such as the barracks and the medical center had all sunk into the ground. The firepower could cover both the outer circle of the defensive line and the inner circle. Even if the demons used the same trick again, they would not be able to cause as much damage as last time. Before long, they saw the familiar figure of the wolf girl. Hey! Lorgar flicked her ears. Long time no see. It's only been a week. Lightning heaved a sigh of relief when she saw how energetic the other party was. After all, according to Maggie's description of the wolf girl's condition when she was carried into the medical center, she looked as if she was about to die. Maybe it's because I've been sleeping every day. It feels longer. Lorgar stretched herself. Nana is so stubborn. She had to wait for a week to recover. I think the wound will heal by itself in a week. Since witches were much more resistant to the sleeping fern's side effects than ordinary people, the sleeping treatment was usually effective in saving the magic power of the healer, as long as it was not life-threatening. This was also the experience accumulated by the Union during the war. You're indeed a monster. You're almost as good as Lady Ashes, Koo. Maggie said while flapping her wings. After talking to Miss Andrea, I don't think it's a compliment, Lorgar muttered. Koo. No, nothing. She walked to Lightning, put her arms around the little girls and lifted her up. Hey, what are you doing? Put me down, Lightning said shyly. Someone's watching. I heard from Sylvie about everything you've done. So, it's still possible to work hard. Lorgar held Lightning in her arms. That's the leader I know. Lightning stopped struggling. She felt a warm feeling in her heart. After a moment of silence, she said in a low voice, but I'm still a coward. The fact that you can say this to me means that you've taken that step. Lorgar put Lightning down. You're not thinking of leaving alone now, are you? Lightning looked at the wolf girl and then at Maggie. She nodded gently. Yes. The moment she agreed, she felt as if something was pressing on her shoulders. But she did not reject this feeling. Instead, she felt inexplicably at ease. Koo. Maggie tilted her head. What are you talking about, Koo? We're talking about celebrating. Lorgar straightened up. Since I'm safe and sound, shouldn't we have a drink? Celebrate, Koo. Let's celebrate, Koo. Maggie echoed excitedly. Hey, wait a minute. Lightning said. I have to patrol at night. Chapter 1103. The day after the funeral, a piece of news from Neverwinter stirred up the whole engineering team. His Majesty had prepared a visiting party for them. All the workers who had completed the 3-month working period would get a paid day off, and their long-lost families would arrive at the terminus of the misty forest from Neverwinter and spend the precious day together. Everyone was grateful for such a considerate decree. As soon as the news arrived, cheers of "Long live the king" could be heard everywhere, and they worked even harder. Snaketooth was one of them. In fact, when the foreman found him and looked at the contact list, he could not believe his eyes. At the end of his row on the list, the name, "White Paper," almost caused his mind to go blank. "Hey, do you agree to this arrangement or not?" Snaketooth clearly remembered the foreman's slightly impatient urging, or rather, the foreman had recorded every detail from seeing the list to signing the name. Every time he recalled the past, he could not help but grin. "Let me make this clear. If you have any objections, you can fill in another name. The administrative office will ask again. But if you're rejected, your holiday will be cancelled." For the sake of saving time, the foreman naturally hoped that the list could be approved in one go. But Snaketooth knew that the man did not understand his feelings at that time. He wanted to hug the administrative office official who had compiled the list and give him a kiss, let alone raise an objection. "I agree, 100% agree." "What? If you agree, you should have said so earlier. Don't just stand there like an idiot." The foreman rolled his eyes at him and went to find the next person after Snaketooth signed the name. Snaketooth stayed where he was and stared blankly at the hand holding the pen for a long time. Until now, he still had the thought, if this is a dream, I might as well never wake up. Unlike when he saw Paper in Neverwinter by chance, he did not dare to greet her because he was afraid of being rejected. Now, Paper was a member of the Witch Union, and her clothes and complexion were not the same as the skinny girl from before. If Paper did not want to have anything to do with rats, his presence would only cause her more trouble. However, the fact that Paper's name was on the list meant that the administrative office had asked for her opinion beforehand, and she had agreed to the visit. What he was most worried about did not happen, and he even got a chance to be alone with her. For Snaketooth, nothing could be more pleasant than this. In the next few days, he was in a state of eagerness and excitement. Due to the large number of visitors and the limited capacity of the train, excluding the goods, it could only transport about 100 people at a time. Therefore, even though he was on the first list of visitors, by the time the day arrived, it was already a week later. "Kid, it's your turn today. She's dressed so cleanly. Is she a girl? Don't forget the time tonight." Snaketooth ran out of the door, blushing under the teasing of his roommates. Only when he boarded the train with the nameplate did he heave a sigh of relief. No matter what, there were only 2 hours left before he could see Paper. Someone in the carriage kept reading out the precautions for visiting, such as not leaving the security perimeter of the forest terminus without permission, meeting after 8:00 at the latest, and not exceeding the prescribed time. In case of an emergency, they should immediately act according to the instructions of the First Army, and so on. However, Snaketooth had heard it many times from people who had been here before, so he was very familiar with it. With a long whistle, the train finally slowly stopped at the platform of the last station in the misty forest. "Get off the train and line up. Don't push." The station staff shouted, "This isn't grocery shopping. You'll get your share." The crowd burst into laughter. Snaketooth felt his heart pounding. The more he tried to restrain himself, the stronger it would be. He had imagined countless scenes of their meeting and rehearsed them over and over again, but when it really came to this moment, he still felt his mouth go dry and he was as clumsy as a fat pigeon. However, when the pretty figure appeared in front of him, Snaketooth found that everything he had imagined disappeared without a trace. He could only smile foolishly and could not say a word. "It turns out that you live in Neverwinter. That's great." The girl trotted over with a smile and grabbed his hand. Without hesitation or dislike, the estrangement of 2 years melted with this smile. Everything was just like the past. At that moment, Snaketooth felt that coming to Neverwinter was the right choice. "So, you came here soon after you reclaimed the Longsong area?" The two of them walked side by side on the forest path. Unlike the noisy center of the camp, this place was much quieter and had a more solitary atmosphere. She, who had not seen him for a long time, seemed to have a lot of things to say to him, as if she wanted to fill in the blank space she had missed. Snaketooth answered all her questions. Compared with the former boss and follower, they were now more like a pair of partners. Yes, the rats were completely eradicated and there were many job openings posted on the square. If we continue to do what we did before, we'll be finished sooner or later. Snaketooth nodded. Tiger Claw and I discussed it and came to Neverwinter. It's the same job, but the salary here is higher, and I can be closer to you. However, these words just flashed across his mind, and he did not say them out loud. No wonder I couldn't find you. You're not in that place anymore, Paper said with emotion. Did you go to the Longsong area? I asked someone to go there, the girl said slowly. When I learned that the entire Dark Corner alley had been demolished, I thought you had already left the western region. So, that's what happened. But since you came to Neverwinter, why didn't you look for me? Paper asked. Well, it's a long story. Snaketooth coughed. At that time, Tiger Claw and I had nothing. In order to have a permanent residence, we were busy from morning to night, so we forgot about it. Even he himself felt this excuse was clumsy. If he had forgotten about it for 2 years, what was the difference between that and not remembering at all? However, he could never say such shameful things as being too embarrassed to greet her and deliberately avoiding her when he saw her. Fortunately, Paper did not pursue the matter further. Me too. When I first came to Neverwinter, I was also very busy. I helped the construction team speed up the solidification of cement, assisted Lady Agatha, and helped the chemical plant make all kinds of strange things. She counted on her fingers and said, His Majesty said that my ability can speed up the reaction process and increase the energy level of the chemical bond. I'm very curious about how he knew that. According to the book, those particles are much smaller than sesame seeds. Can you imagine it? If you look at an atom as big as an opera house, its core is less than the size of a walnut. Hearing these words that he could not understand, Snaketooth could only nod in agreement. For a moment, he did feel the change in Paper and the difference between them. But more than that, his gaze lingered on the other party's every frown and every smile, those sparkling eyes, those slightly raised eyelashes, the thin tip of her nose, the opening and closing of her lips. Everything was so captivating. He felt an impulse in his heart ready to burst forth. By the way, Paper changed the topic after telling him about her experience. After knowing that you were in Neverwinter, I asked Miss Scroll to check the files and found that Sunflower and the others were also here. That's great. We can get together often in the future. Snaketooth did not hear the latter part of Paper's words. At this moment, his mind was completely occupied by one thought. So he said it out loud. I like you, Paper. After blurting it out, he realized what he had done. An indescribable sense of nervousness immediately wrapped around his body, and his entire heart was in his throat. For a moment, Snaketooth even regretted his impulse. But to his surprise, he soon got a response. Chapter 1104. Did she really say that at that time? After listening to Leaf's narration, Vendy burst into laughter. What about Snaketooth? Didn't he say anything else? He just giggled with her. Leaf shook her head. Maybe it wasn't easy to muster up the courage to say those words. He probably used up all his courage after just one time. I think so. Vendy's smile widened. It's so good to be young. Is it good for us to do this? To eavesdrop on our conversation. Leaf's green phantom descended from the branches and condensed into her true form. I'm not eavesdropping. I'm just fulfilling His Majesty's request. Vendy said righteously, he asked me to pay attention to their actions. Since I want to pay attention to them, talking is part of it, isn't it? In that case, there was indeed no problem. Besides, if I didn't ask you to, you wouldn't have eavesdropped on their conversation, right? Wendy looked at Leaf with a smile. Ah. The latter cleared her throat and raised the corner of her mouth. Yes. The two looked at each other and burst into laughter. Leaf waved her hand. A huge vine rose from the ground and slowly lifted herself and Vendi to the top of the tree. Then the dense branches spread, crisscrossed, and reunited to form a veranda made of green leaves. Looking from this angle, the world suddenly became a lot brighter. The dense forest that extended all the way to Dragon's Pine Ridge was like a sea of emerald trees, and on the other side was a vast grassland. When she was still in the Witch Cooperation Association, Leaf would occasionally build similar treehouses for her sisters to avoid the heavy rain and the muddy and wet ground. However, it usually took more than half a day to build a resting place. In order to save as much magic power as possible, the treehouse was basically like a cicada cocoon. Even so, not everyone had a place to stay. But now, not only did the veranda look like a model, but also a lounge chair and a tea table were built. There were even 2 broad-leaf cups on the coffee table, and the light golden flower nectar in the cup sparkled under the sunlight. "Did you brew this yourself?" Vendi picked up the teacup and gently sniffed it. An elegant fragrance wafted into her nose. "Yes, I used morning dew, honey, and sugar cane wine. I also added some half-open jasmine buds." Leaf nodded. "Although it's not as good as chaos drinks, you can drink as much as you want." "You're getting stronger and stronger," Vendi exclaimed. "Although they all say that Her Highness Anna is a once-in-a-century genius, I don't think you're any worse than her. As long as you have enough time, you might be able to control all the forests in the world and spread your consciousness to every corner of the continent. At my current speed, I definitely can't do that." Leaf smiled and waved her hand. "It will take nearly 10 years just to integrate this misty forest. By the time I can leave here, I'll probably be old." "That's not necessarily true." Vendi sipped the tea in the cup. "Agatha said that the influence between witches and magic power is mutual. The more powerful a witch was, the stronger her body and the longer her lifespan would be. If it weren't for the cruelty of the war, those transcendents might still be alive now." She looked up at the sky. "And your magic power is even higher than theirs. That is to say, you may be the one who can live the longest among us." Leaf did not answer. Instead, she showed a trace of loneliness, but Vendi did not notice. "By the way, it's not just these 2 points. Even your appearance is related to your magic power level." She paused for a moment. "The legendary Queen of Fallen Star, Alice, is devastatingly beautiful. Even Pasha and the others have admitted it." Vendi withdrew her gaze and carefully looked at her for a moment. "Well, I do feel that you've become a little different from before. How should I say it? The moment you descended from the shade of the tree, you looked like a forest fairy. It's really enviable." Leaf helplessly rolled her eyes at her. This doesn't sound like something the gentle and caring Vendi would say. Who knows? Maybe I didn't have the mood to think about such a problem before. Vendi laughed. Apart from gritting your teeth and surviving, what magic power can achieve, what it will become in the future, whether it's ugly or beautiful, are just superfluous things. That's true. Leaf curled her lips. Now you're starting to think about the influence of magic power on your appearance. Is it possible that you also have someone in your heart? That's 2 different things. Besides, you're not much younger than me. Aren't you afraid of following in my footsteps? Let's not talk about not much younger for now. I already have a forest, so what's there to be dissatisfied about? But even if you don't tell me, I have a way to find out. After all, I'm the one who provided honey with the animal messengers. Unfortunately, as the person in charge of the Witch Union, every report of hers has to be read by me first." The 2 teased each other and enjoyed the afternoon's harmonious conversation. It was not until the sun gradually set that Leaf returned to the topic at hand. "So, are you leaving soon?" "Yes." Vendi stood up. "I have to send Her Highness Anna and the others back. Seagull can't fly at night, so it has to take off before 4 o'clock. It seems that Paper can't spend the campfire party with her friends." Unlike other family members who took the train to visit, the little girl was directly transported to the front by glider. The scheduled return flight could not be delayed for a day because of her, nor could they leave her alone. There's no other way. Vendi spread out her hands. Whether it's for the sake of safety or the needs of Neverwinter, she can't spend too much time on the road. Let me help you call her. Leaf transformed back into her spirit form. Thank you. Leaf went into the trunk and appeared in front of Vendi after a few seconds. All right, she'll meet you at the landing field. She should be saying goodbye to her friends now. I'll send you there. Vendi nodded and turned around to wait for the balcony to descend. Well, Leaf suddenly said softly. What's wrong? No. She hesitated. Nothing, Vendi exhaled, turned around and said softly, don't keep your thoughts to yourself. I'm always willing to listen. I'm just a little what? A little. Leaf clenched her fists and was about to say something when she suddenly froze. She looked over Vendi's head and fixed her eyes on the north of the forest. Sensing the shock and surprise in her eyes, Vendi could not help but look in the same direction. She saw several wisps of black smoke rising from the dense forest like a slowly unfolding curtain. Chapter 1105. It was between spring and summer, when the soil was fertile. How could there be a fire in the forest? And it seemed that there was more than one fire. Leaf? Vendi shouted. I don't know. Leaf suddenly came to her senses. That place is beyond my fusion range. I can't sense the specific situation in the black smoke. If there's a fire, we have to stop it from spreading. I know. Leaf's expression was a little strange, as if she had mixed feelings. She bit her lip and nodded. Anyway, you go and meet with the others first. When the emergency plan is activated, the camp may be in chaos, and it won't be easy to leave by then. Now there were not only workers on vacation in the terminal, but also a large group of family members who had never been to the battlefield. It would not be easy to evacuate them in an orderly manner. Vendi soon realized this. Will you be okay by yourself? Don't worry. I know how to deal with it, Leaf said as she descended from the balcony. She glanced at Vendi for the last time and then jumped into the dense forest. A moment later, a shrill alarm rang over the misty forest. Yes, I got it. In the general staff of Tower Station Number 2, Phelan Schilt put down the phone and turned to report to Edith. Madam, there's an accident on the Western Front. What did you say? There's a fire in the northern part of the forest. The Pearl of the Northern Region frowned. Did Miss Leaf see it? Yes. The evacuation plan has been activated. The soldiers of the First Army have entered a state of Level 2 alert. Inform the Commander-in-Chief and all the relevant senior officials. Edith thought for a moment and said decisively, tell them the General Staff needs to hold a pre-war meeting. Pre-war meeting? Phelan repeated. Do you think it's... Yes, Edith said seriously. I suspect the fire is a new trick of the demons. In less than a quarter of an hour, the generals of the First Army and the representatives of the Witch Union gathered in the underground conference room. After the Pearl of the Northern Region explained the general situation, she told everyone the latest news she had received. The sentinel at the forest terminus has confirmed that the cause of the smoke is indeed a fire. Affected by the wind, the fire is quickly spreading toward the terminus. Only a forest fire, no traces of demons? Iron Axe asked in a deep voice. We haven't received any reports yet. Phelan shook his head. The smoke is blocking our vision. No one knows what's going on behind the line of fire. Miss Sylvie, can you see anything? The concealing forest is too far from here, Sylvie replied, unless I go there myself. Damn it, at this time. Iron Axe glanced at the map. Where is Her Highness now? According to the original plan, Princess Anna and some witches would rendezvous with the flying team at the terminal of the forest and then take the Seagull back to Neverwinter. He should be on the returning Dark River one. After receiving the news of the fire, Miss Kant asked me to use the sigil of listening to inform them to change their itinerary. Good job, Iron Axe said with a sigh of relief. So only Her Highness and her party are left there? After getting a positive answer, he said to the Light of Dawn, tell them to take off immediately. Don't wait any longer. Yes. After dealing with the evacuation, Iron Axe looked at the staff of the General Staff. Now, tell me your opinion. Leaf stood at the top of a giant fir tree, looking at the rolling smoke in the distance. In just over an hour, the fire had expanded a lot. Now, not only was the smoke flying all over the sky pressing down on her, but she could also faintly see the flashing red light under the smoke. She seemed to hear the cries of the burning trees. Although it was not within her control, the heart of the forest was still trembling slightly. Because it was also resonating in her heart. When facing Vendi, the word that she did not say was, fear. After more than a year of annexing and merging, Leaf had gradually touched the essence of her ability. In a sense, it could indeed make her an immortal existence. All the plants incorporated into the heart of the forest would become a part of her. In other words, as long as the area of integration was larger, she would be more difficult to eradicate. After all, it was easy to clear a lawn, but it would be much more difficult to flatten a forest or an entire grassland. As for making the world barren, it was almost impossible. She remembered His Majesty once said that plants were the foundation of the natural world. Even if the whole world was destroyed, the earth was dug 3 feet deep, and the sky and earth were turned upside down, the first to appear on the surface would still be this group of tenacious creatures. But the problem was that at that time, she could no longer be regarded as herself. The clear spring flowing underground, the crawling insects in the soil, the trembling beehives on the trunks, the singing birds on the branches. These huge information constantly came from every corner of the forest and were engraved in her memory. If she suddenly accepted them, she would immediately lose her mind, which was why Leaf had to slow down the speed of integration. However, she found that even so, it was impossible for her to record so much information by herself. The reason why she had not become a lunatic was that the heart of the forest had made a choice for her. Countless intertwined roots and vines formed a huge consciousness, and magic power and memory were integrated into one, flowing in the forest. This meant that once the integrated forest was destroyed, she might lose part of her memory. Even if new seedlings grew out of the ruins, what she had lost would not come back. It might be her acquaintance with Vendi and Scroll, it might be her escape from the Witch Cooperation Association with Nightingale, Mystery Moon, and Lily, it might be the tender scene when she met His Majesty, it might also be her life in Neverwinter. She did not want to forget even Kara's stubbornness and prejudice, and the persecution and pursuit of the church. Because these were her unique experiences and the proof of her existence in the world. She was afraid of losing them. At the thought that this fire might appear in the integrated misty forest, Leaf felt an indescribable pain in her heart. But she could not retreat. Because all of this was to defeat the demons and win the battle of divine will. She could not selfishly abandon her sisters for her own sake. They were also contributing their strength, and she could not let them down. Thinking of this, Leaf took a deep breath, raised her hands, and looked up at the sky full of afterglow. In an instant, a dazzling green light bloomed from her chest. Please listen to my call and take action. At that moment, the whole forest was like an awakened giant, slowly raising its body. Countless trees bent backward and fell at the same time. Even the turf and soil were curled up like a carpet. It was hard to describe the momentum of the scene as an earthquake. Chapter 1106. Based on the current information, the General Staff's conclusion is roughly like this. Edith knocked on the table and said, "This arson is likely to be a diversion." A diversion? Iron Axe said in a low voice, "You mean the enemy's goal isn't to cut off our supply line? The demons want to, but they can't do it." Edith pointed at the map and said, "The distance from the Tequila ruins to the north of the terminus station in the forest is longer than the railway on the plain. It's more than 500 kilometers. How much red mist do they need to carry to reach the arson area and set up an ambush?" I think our tequila colleagues should know this very well. If they don't set up a bloodline and don't have an outpost, the army can't support such a long battle line. Phyllis, the representative of tequila, paused for a moment and said, based on past experience, 500 soldiers is the demon's limit. The terminus station in the forest is a well-fortified station, which is like a small stronghold, Edith continued. His Majesty has made a plan a long time ago. Once the demons set fire to the forest, Miss Leaf will create a safe isolation belt to keep the fire out of the station. This isolation belt is also a natural shooting range without any shelter or cover. If the demons want to break through the firing net of several blockhouses, 500 soldiers will be as good as dead. Let's take a step back and say they really have a way to send their army into the misty forest without any supply line. Arson is a way to expose themselves. The light of dawn added, it might be better to launch a direct attack at night. After all, the forest itself is a kind of cover. Before entering the territory controlled by Lady Leaf, the demons can easily hide their movements. That makes sense. Iron Axe nodded and said, but Sylvie, Lightning, and Maggie haven't found any traces of the demons. If they plan to attack Tower Station No. 1 again, I'm afraid it's too late now. This is also a puzzle that we haven't solved yet. Maybe the enemy has thought of a new way to deceive the detection, or maybe they've used a new weapon that we've never seen before, Edith replied frankly, but the diversion strategy doesn't require us to attack the east and the west. You mean Tower Station 0? Our current investigation focus is all in front of the railway, so we can't rule out this possibility. But the further the distance from the front line, the more troops the demons can send, Iron Axe said thoughtfully. That's right, Edith affirmed. I understand, the Commander-in-Chief said after a moment of silence. When Her Royal Highness returns safely, send the Black River No. 1 to Tower Station 0, and No. 2 to patrol between Station 0 and Station 1. The rest of the troops remained motionless and raised their alert level until the alarm was lifted. Besides, even if it's unlikely that the demons will attack from the north, it's better to put out the fire as soon as possible. He turned to look at Agatha. Can I ask you to do this? Don't worry, we'll do our best, the Ice Witch replied. Good. The investigation at the front line remains the same, and the main target is still the tequila front line. Miss Sylvie, leave it to me, Sylvie said with a nod. Iron Axe clapped his hands and said, judging from the current speed of the fire, it will probably reach the edge of the forest by evening. If the demons don't know that Miss Leaf can isolate the sea of fire on her own, they will bare their fangs when the sun sets. We still have about an hour. Let's get moving. Standing at the top of the watchtower, Sylvie felt a slight chill in the breeze that brushed her cheeks. The sun was setting, and the brilliant afterglow dyed half of the sky red. The vast grassland seemed to be dyed in 3 different colors. The furthest one was gold, shining as brightly as the sun, and the nearer one was red with a tinge of green. Against the blue sky, it looked like a sea of purple flowers. The grassland under her feet was covered in shadows, which were blue and black, which was the exclusive color of the night. Such a beautiful scene could only be seen in this boundless, barbarian land. However, it was also a countdown to the coming war. Every time the sun set, the enemies were one step closer to them. Under such a background, even the most moving natural scenery lost some of its beauty and became austere and bleak. Sylvie turned her head and looked to the southwest. Although the misty forest was not within the observation range of the eye of magic, she still took some time to look at it. She could not tell why, but she felt a little worried. In retrospect, whether it was the judgment of the general staff or the order given by Iron Axe, there was nothing to nitpick about. Although it was not perfect, at least it was steady and prudent. Without the supply of red mist, the demons were like a nailed string. The longer the string was stretched, the weaker their strength would be. If the demons were really coming for the forest terminal and Tower Station 0, the garrison would be able to hold on until the reinforcements arrived. There was no doubt that the enemies would invest most of their strength in the front line of the railway. But why can't I get rid of this worry? Sylvie shook her head and suppressed the distracting thoughts in her mind. When she was about to glance at the front line again, she suddenly saw a ball of light at the corner of her eye. Light? How? She widened her eyes in surprise and looked at the ball of light. It was bright red, like a dazzling flame. After jumping into her field of vision, it was moving quickly to the south. Strange, am I seeing things? The eye of magic should not be able to see that far. Yes, she could not see it. The darkness in her field of vision proved this. Beyond the range of the light, the eye of magic would lose its observation ability and shrink to an ordinary perspective. In the dim light, it was difficult to distinguish the boundary between the earth and the forest. It was basically pitch black. That was why the light was so eye-catching. Since it was not an illusion, what did she see? Sylvie suddenly felt a chill rising from the soles of her feet and up her spine, making her shiver uncontrollably. She knew what she was worried about. That was something that everyone had overlooked. What she saw was magic power. And it was an extremely powerful magic power. The observation range of the eye of magic was limited by its own limitations and could not spread its magic power further. However, when there was a powerful magic power source, the magic power would be reflected on the eye of magic and thus seen by her. It was like the sunlight shining through the closed eyelids. To be able to be directly sensed at this distance, the magic power of the intruder must have reached an astonishing level. The cursed demon. This was the only name left in Sylvie's mind. The humanoid alien from the Tequila ruins, the commander of the demon army. As a general, he was always the core of the army. When two armies fought, the general was like a chess player, and the outcome of the game was determined by the outcome. It was rare for a general to be bare-chested. However, they had neglected the fact that the intruder was also a powerful senior demon with terrifying combat power. At this moment, the speed of the red dot was still increasing. It was almost 3 times faster than Maggie's Devil Beast's flying speed. From the beginning, the intruder was targeting Leaf. Chapter 1107. But at this distance, it was impossible to warn the enemy. The speed of the red dot increased by a few notches and became even more distinct. What should I do? Yes, the phone. I can use the phone to inform Leaf. Sylvie slid all the way from the top of the watchtower to the underground conference room and shouted to the light of dawn, "Call Leaf and tell her to leave immediately." Ferlin realized that something big must have happened. Without asking why, he picked up a phone and shook the handle with all his might. "Leave, where are you going?" "Anywhere is fine. Neverwinter, south of the forest, the farther away from the terminal, the better." At this time, all eyes in the conference room were focused on Sylvie. "Did you find anything?" Edith asked. "We guessed wrong, the enemy is aiming at Leaf, and there's only one of them." Sylvie looked to the southwest anxiously. Leaf needs to concentrate when she controls the forest, which is equivalent to an entity. As long as the enemy can see the flow of magic power, they'll be able to locate her. They set the forest on fire just for this moment. What? Edith suddenly frowned. Can you also observe the demon's actions from here? Because the enemy's magic power is too strong, she murmured. But Lady Leaf is also very strong, Philin interrupted. If she doesn't rely on fire, even an army of mad demons can't do anything to her in a short time, right? But since the enemy has done this, they can't be unprepared. Sylvie could not help but clench her fists. The red dot in her field of vision had begun to rise rapidly, and its trajectory was like a raised snake head. Is the phone still not connected? Yes, no one is answering. As expected, all of Leaf's attention is attracted by the fire. At this rate, the two will meet in 1 or 2 minutes at most. Call the terminal, Edith said. Ask the first army stationed there to inform Leaf and ask them to prepare for reinforcements. Yes. Philin turned around and picked up another phone. While waiting anxiously, Sylvie clearly saw that after the red light passed the apex, it fell straight down like an ominous meteor. Launching a frontal assault from the sky without any scruples, she had already vaguely guessed the worst answer in her heart. The enemy was probably the magic slayer. This should be enough. Leaf clapped her hands and let out a long sigh. The trees at the edge of the camp had been separated from the north side, so no matter how the fire burned, it would not threaten the safety of the terminus. However, when she saw the twisted and withered branches in the flames, she still felt a little uncomfortable. How many memories would she lose if she burned the forest under her control? How many of them were important and precious? Just thinking about it made him feel uncomfortable. Pull yourself together, Leaf. They still had to prepare to extinguish the fire. She silently encouraged herself and was about to walk around the camp to see if there was anything she could do to help. Suddenly, a whistling sound came from above and attracted her attention. Leaf looked up. It was almost night and the sky was dark purple, so it was difficult to see what was making the sound. Be careful, quickly dodge, someone suddenly shouted. Before Leaf could see who it was, she subconsciously hid in the trees. At the same time, a black shadow fell from the sky and almost brushed past her face. The surrounding branches and leaves were instantly turned into powder. The moment the black shadow landed on the ground, there was no earth-shattering sound. It could even be said that it was silent. This strange scene made Leaf feel a strong sense of uneasiness. However, before she could do anything, a distorted ripple had already spread out with the black shadow as the center. The magic power that had been flowing smoothly suddenly froze, then it broke into pieces like a mirror. Ah! Leaf only felt dizzy for a while, and then was forced out of the trunk by an irresistible force. After falling heavily on the ground, she could not help but taste something sweet in her throat. She opened her mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. It was not until then that Leaf saw the true face of the shadow. It was a tall and straight demon with extremely sharp facial features. Except for its dark blue skin and weird clothes, it was almost no different from a human. Just by standing there, it gave people an indescribable pressure. It was as if the air had become sticky. Leaf panted and propped herself up. No matter how hard she called out to the forest, it did not respond to her. It was not the first time that she had been forcibly cut off from the heart of the forest. The magic slayer. Her heart sank. However, the other party did not sneer nor howl. He only stretched out his 5 claws that were as sharp as blades and pounced towards her. Leaf clenched her teeth and closed her eyes. However, she did not feel the pain she had expected. Ding! A strangely shaped big sword was placed horizontally in front of her, blocking the opponent's sharp claws. The blade was as thick as a door, and the golden sun symbol on the blade was something that would never be forgotten once one saw it. Emissary Ashes. Your opponent is here, monster. Ashes blocked the magic slayer's claws and stood in front of Leaf. Ashes? Leaf's eyes widened in surprise. Didn't you return to Neverwinter with Princess Tilly? I saw the seagull with my own eyes. Yes, it should have been like that, Ashes said without turning her head. But I felt that the fire was a little strange, so I volunteered to stay. After all, if something goes wrong, I can also help, can't I? So that's why. She was the one who gave the warning. So, this is the magic slayer you met before? Yes, but you have to be careful. It's much stronger than the senior demon you met before. I can see that. Ashes held the big sword in front of her chest. Don't worry. I may not win, but I'll be fine as long as I can hold on until the reinforcements arrive. The demon looked in the direction of the campsite and then at the two coldly. Extraordinary. Although the demon's pronunciation was not fluent, it was undoubtedly a language that humans could understand. This was even more incredible than the magic slayer himself. In the long history of the Battle of Divine Will, no demon had ever communicated with a witch. You can speak our language? Leaf could not help but ask. Learning is the foundation of evolution. Only you will be surprised by this. The senior demon spread its arms. Countless things can change in hundreds of years, but you still act as if it was yesterday. Demons, extraordinary, and the titles haven't changed at all. It's pathetic. What did you say? Ashes shouted in a low voice. A gust of wind answered her. Chapter 11:08. Ah! Suddenly, Leaf let out a cry of surprise. Ashes turned her head and found that the gust of wind that had swept over her body had not disappeared. Although it had weakened a lot, it still blew the leaves up. At the same time, the magic slayer appeared behind her. How is this possible? That cyclone is clearly a kind of ability. Why didn't the god's stone of retaliation completely seal its effect? Without much time to think, Ashes drew back her sword and slashed at the magic slayer's neck. However, the magic slayer blocked the attack with only one hand. As the two collided, she clearly saw the blue ripples on the demon's arm. The magic slayer did not even look at her. Instead, he raised the gale again and blew Leaf further away. This guy only wants to kill Leaf. Ashes followed closely behind the magic slayer, but the distance between them was gradually widening. Leaf tried to fight back, but the magic slayer simply waved his hand and all her efforts were in vain. This level gap could not be overcome with willpower. The flow of magic power in the space was disrupted, and it was difficult for her to gather her strength. Is this the senior demon's control of magic power? Whether it was interrupting Leaf's ability or taking the time to knock her back, it seemed to be doing it with ease. Ash's palms were sweating. If this went on, she would not be able to catch up with the opponent's fatal blow that could come at any time. At this critical moment, Ashes was more focused than ever. Faster, faster. For the past 2 years, she had been following the Tequila's extraordinary training method and had been wearing weights most of the time. After taking them off, she could feel the changes in her body. The magic power attached to her muscles and bones grew stronger and stronger, constantly nourishing every corner of her body. She even had the illusion that the magic power was gradually replacing her flesh and blood. But this was not enough. She had to move faster to save Leaf. And, to protect the people she wanted to protect. Driven by her consciousness, the magic power began to gather in her legs. During the holy duel with Lorgar, Ashes saw a strange fighting technique. When the magic power was focused on a certain part of the body, it could greatly increase the explosive power and endurance. This was also the reason why the wolf girl could change her limbs. The magic slayer did not focus on her, so she could focus on sensing the flow of magic power in her body. The fragmented surroundings made the feeling even clearer. When the demon used the same trick for the 4th time and pulled the distance between them to 20 meters, it directly broke through Leaf's vine defense and reached out its sharp claws to stab her chest. This attack seemed to be irreversible. Almost at the same time, Ashes used all her strength to kick the tree. In that instant, she felt that she had vaguely grasped something. Her body seemed to have turned into a bolt of lightning, covering the distance of more than 20 meters in the blink of an eye. It was as if time had stopped. Even without using her eyes, she could clearly see the scene of the tree being smashed to pieces, the wind brought up by the magic slayer's sprint, and the scene of weeds being crushed. For the first time, the magic slayer stopped and raised his hands to block her attack. Bang, bang. With all her strength, the magic slayer was sent flying a few meters away. He tumbled twice in the air and landed steadily on the ground. Ashes did not stop. She caught the falling leaf and once again shielded her behind her. Oh. The demon raised his eyebrows and showed a trace of interest. Open fire. At this moment, the reinforcements that Ashes had been waiting for finally arrived. The team of God's punishment witches stationed at the terminus of the forest jumped out of the dense forest and pulled the trigger of their shotguns at the only enemy in the forest. A deafening roar resounded through the forest. Bullets sprayed at the target like raindrops. The magic slayer used the tree trunks as cover and dodged to the left and right like a ghost. Even so, amidst the flying tree bark and debris, blue light could be seen from time to time on its body. Further away, there was the sound of hurried and chaotic footsteps. Apparently, after the god's punishment witches arrived, the first army was gradually closing in on the demon. The demon took one last look at Ashes and leaped into the air. An amazing burst of magic power burst out from its body. It quickly rushed up and disappeared into the boundless night in a few seconds. Damn it, the leading god's punishment witch spat. She walked up to Ashes and squatted down. My name is Elena. Are you okay? I'm fine. Ashes glanced at the semi-conscious Leaf in her arms and reached out to gently wipe the blood from the corner of her mouth. But she needs treatment. Don't worry, Elena comforted her. I've been informed by the front line that Miss Nana and Miss Nightfall are on their way. As soon as the Ascendant landed on the ground, a junior guard came forward to greet him. Lord Osrook, this is the breathing tank for you. Before he could finish, the man snatched the tank away and directly put it to his nose to take a deep breath. Hiss. After a long time, Osrook seemed to have recovered and said, replace it for me. Yes. After exhaling the waste tank, the guard inserted a new tank as long as an arm into his back. For the promoted, this breathing method did not rely on armor and would not hinder his movement, so it was an ideal way to carry him. What about your trip? A little bit, but it's within my expectations, Osrook said expressionlessly. After all, that's the humans' territory. If I couldn't even stop them, I would have to wonder if Kabradabi really betrayed us. No, they didn't stop the real you, the guard said loudly. The breathing tank limited your strength. If you were within the range of the birth tower, those bugs would be no match for you. Driving magic power would speed up the consumption of red mist, especially for the higher ascendants. Considering the amount of red mist needed to travel back and forth, it was like fighting with shackles on. So this is just a bait. Next time, I'll choose a fairer place. Osrook looked to the south of the forest and said, a cemetery suitable for eternal rest. If the Sky Lord could support you more, the guard said indignantly, you wouldn't have to take such a risk. The birth tower of Tequila is also. Risk? Osrook interrupted his subordinate. I think it's quite interesting. After all, it's better to experience it yourself than to listen to others' reports. It buckled a deformed steel ball from its armor and looked at it carefully for a moment. The females who are also awakened have not improved at all, but the males who have no magic power have changed. Those humans are not completely useless. It would be better if I could understand them more. The guard did not reply, but a look of indignation appeared on his face. Osrook put the steel ball into his arms disapprovingly. As for the Lord, I believe he must have tried his best. But the Lord must have his own concerns and difficulties, so there's nothing to be indignant about. After all, we're all fighting to reach a higher realm and reach the sky, aren't we? You are right. The guard lowered his head. Take the tombstone and retreat. There's still a long way to go back to Tequila. Osrook slowly flew up and turned to the direction of the holy city. Now that the bait has been laid, all we need to do is wait. Wait for the day when it tightens. Chapter 1109. 2 days later. Grey Castle, City of Neverwinter. That's pretty much what happened at that time. Ashes recounted the details of the battle. After the fire was extinguished, lightning searched about 100 kilometers to the north and found some traces left by the enemy. According to the scene analysis, the traces were left by the spider demons when they passed through the forest. There weren't many of them, about 3 or 4. Due to the interruption of communication in the forest, Roland did not know that Leaf had been attacked until the next evening. The next morning, he immediately asked Tilly and Vendi to drive the Seagull to the terminal station and bring Leaf back to Neverwinter. Ashes was fine and seemed to be unscathed, but Leaves was carried off the plane. The silver lining was that Nightfall had planted the seed of symbiosis in her body. Even though Leaf was unconscious, the symbiosis did not seem to be in much pain. This meant that Leaf's mental exhaustion was far greater than her physical injuries. Roland suppressed his distracting thoughts and looked at the big map on his desk. He had a clear picture of the whole attack in his mind. The demon commander had indeed noticed the abnormality of the misty forest. After all, the railway line had taken a turn here and extended all the way to the Tequila ruins. However, it did not choose to attack the trenches and barbed wire fences at the terminal station. Instead, it directly targeted the witches. A small group of people traveled nearly 500 kilometers from the ruins of the Tequila ruins to the northern end of the forest. Such a long march was destined to be impossible for a large army to fight. Presumably, the spider demons were not only responsible for the arson mission, but also carrying a large number of red mist cans. In a sense, this was also a tactical operation by the enemy. Setting fire to the forest was just a pretense to attract the witches' attention. Now that he thought about it, whether or not there was an emergency strategy for the fire attack, the controller of the forest was very likely to stay in place and pay attention to the further development of the situation. This was the moment that the enemy seized. Perhaps in the eyes of the demons, it was Leaf who supported the logistics of the First Army. As long as they killed the forest controller, they would be able to resolve the crisis at the front lines and force the humans to retreat without a fight. Although there were some deviations in their intentions, the fact that they were able to come up with such a plan already showed the extent of the demons' understanding of magic. They accurately guessed the form of Leaf's ability and targeted her with a beheading attack. They relied on their individual strength to run a long distance and calculated the time needed to advance and retreat. It could be said that every step was closely linked. If one did not have a deep understanding of the use of magic power, it would be impossible to achieve this. He even suspected that the demons had seen abilities similar to Leaf's. Although it would take the enemy team at least 1 week to return by the original route, and it was not difficult to catch up with the spider demons by following their distinct tracks, it was meaningless for them to do so. The Magic Slayer, who could fly independently, could abandon the team and escape at any time. If they sent too few people to chase after the spider demons, they would be easily bitten, and if they sent too many people, they would only be able to kill a few spider demons and some low-level demons. Similarly, the enemy did not have any good countermeasures against the secret movements of such an elite team. Most of the important witches were protected by God's punishment witches, but for Leaf, Maggie, and Lightning, who were erratic, it was impossible to arrange a perfect protection plan. Fortunately, there were not many senior demons who could do this. Moreover, when the Magic Slayer ran at full speed, there would be obvious signs of magic power. As long as the enemy prioritized retreat, it would not be easy for them to succeed. Another thing that caught Roland's attention was the conversation between the Magic Slayer and Ashes. Demons can speak human language. As a senior demon, Cabradabi, who had been captured alive, did not have this ability. Without Camilla's mind connection, he could not even communicate with Cabradabi. Learning is the foundation of evolution. Countless things can change in hundreds of years, but you still live as if it were yesterday. Rumor has it that before the first battle of Divine Will, someone had come into contact with the demons. It was a human who passed on his knowledge to them. The words Ashes repeated and the rumors Pasha mentioned alternated in Roland's mind. For some reason, Roland felt that the Magic Slayer was proud when he talked about the past hundreds of years, as if he had witnessed countless vicissitudes of life. Could it be that it was a devil from the Union era, or even earlier? Is that why it learned the human language? But, this was too inconceivable. Just as Roland was deep in thought, Vendi's voice suddenly came from outside the office. Your Majesty. She pushed the door open and said, Leaf is awake. I'm coming. Roland suddenly stood up and looked at Ashes. Do you want to go with me? The Transcendent nodded. By the way, Roland said as he walked past her, I forgot to thank you. Although Ashes looked unscathed, it did not mean that she was unscathed. Only when Roland got closer would he notice that there were several shallow wounds on her face and knuckles. The whirlwind that could blow Leaf away was not as gentle as a spring breeze. Normally, such small wounds would not stay on an extraordinary for more than a day, but they had not healed yet. In other words, Once she made a mistake, she could suffer a fatal injury that could not be recovered. Obviously, the intensity of this battle was not as simple as she said. Ashes calmly accepted Roland's gratitude. She just slightly lowered her head and glanced at Roland with her golden eyes. Treat Tilly well. Of course, even if you didn't say it, Roland pursed his lips and understood what Pasha meant. This was the right thing to do, just like how she saved Leaf. It turned out that a straightforward extraordinary could also have such thoughts. He could not help but smile. Let's go. When Roland walked into Leaf's bedroom, the room was already full of people. Anna, Nightingale, Tilly, Scroll, Mystery Moon, almost all the witches who joined the union in the first batch had gathered here. When they saw Roland, they all made way for him. In the crowd, he saw Leaf, who had already sat up. Her green hair was a little messy, and her face was a little pale, but she did not look too haggard. Her eyes were still bright. Your Majesty, Leaf said in a low voice, I've made you worry. It's good that you're fine. Roland breathed a sigh of relief. Her previous coma was indeed caused by mental exhaustion. But he also knew that it was a little forced to say, it's good that you're fine. Leaf had also suffered from a curse similar to Lightning's. She still had internal injuries caused by the forcible interruption of the Heart of Forest state. At most, it was not life-threatening. I've already heard about the specific situation from Ashes. You just have a good rest and don't worry about the forest for the time being. As for your injuries, I'll definitely find a way. She shook her head and said, No, Your Majesty, please let me go back to the front. Leaf. Nightingale could not help but cry out. I know what everyone is thinking, but me lying on the bed won't help the situation at all, right? Leaf spoke very slowly, but her tone was very clear. Whether in the misty forest or in Neverwinter, the curse won't disappear. In this case, there's no point in resting. But, Vendi murmured. As long as I stay in the forest for a day, the communication between the two places can be maintained, and the experimental fields won't be abandoned. I can also help transport the supplies needed by the front lines. This will more or less be of some help to the goal of defeating the demons. Comparing the two, it's clear which is the better choice, isn't it? She slightly panted and tried to smile. Don't worry. This time, if I see something wrong, I'll definitely retreat. Everyone was speechless for a moment. Roland took a deep breath. Well, he should have guessed it earlier. If Leaf had not been like this, how could she have walked all the way from the impassable mountain range to Border Town barefoot and brought all her surviving sisters back here? She was just like the forest. Beneath her soft appearance, there was a tough heart. I see. After a moment of silence, Roland nodded and said, but you have to promise me that before the magic slayer with the power of the curse is killed, you can't act alone at any time. Then he looked at Ashes and said, can you take care of her during this period? Chapter 11:10. Back at the Sleeping Spells residential area, Ashes heard Tilly coughing behind her as soon as she closed the door. Ahem, do you understand what Roland meant by taking care of her? She could not help curling up the corner of her mouth and deliberately replied in a confused tone, isn't it exactly what it means? Stay by Leaf's side, like taking care of a patient. She's injured, so it must be very inconvenient for her to. Hey! This time, Ashes couldn't help but smile, revealing the corners of her mouth. So you were lying to me. Don't worry, I know what I should do. She turned around and blinked. His Majesty just wanted to use the Extraordinaire's unique perception of magic fluctuations to warn Leaf in advance, just like how I met you. If not for this ability, you would not have seen me in the crowd with my hands covered in blood. I'm not a demon, Tilly said with her arms crossed. It's just an example. Ashes waved her hands in surrender. After all, I'm the only one who has fought with the Magic Slayer, right? What happens after the warning? Of course, we'll approach the reinforcements and work together to defeat the enemy. Really? I'm not Princess Tilly of the Wild Flame clan, who wants to challenge every opponent. Ashes smiled. As long as her magic is not blocked, Leaf can cross the entire forest in an instant. There's no point for me to stay here. Phew. Tilly exhaled. Don't forget what you said. Of course. She walked up to Princess Tilly and looked her in the eyes. I'll be with you for a long time. That girl was born into a noble family and doesn't know how to take care of people. She thinks she can fight. How can I trust her to take care of you? What are you talking about, silly? Tilly glared at her and walked back into the house grumpily. When she reached the door, she suddenly stopped and said in a low voice, I am actually very happy that you can save Leaf. Ashes was slightly stunned. If you're only protecting me, it's a waste of your abilities. Tilly turned around and said, although you always say that it's the safest choice for me to go back to Sleeping Island, you actually like it here, don't you? Now you smile a lot more than before. Is that so? She couldn't help but touch her cheek. Even when we were on Sleeping Island, you rarely smiled. You always had a straight face, as if you were always waiting to fight with your enemy. Tilly continued, I'm afraid that even you didn't notice it, but the new witches are very afraid of you. Only an innocent girl like Maggie can mess with you. But now, not only do you get along well with the Witch Union, I heard that you have an admirer. You mean Lorgar? No, she's just more familiar with me. It's probably because we often spar. That's good, Tilly interrupted. Compared to the Avenger of the past, I prefer to see you now. But... She paused and said, this doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want. Do you understand? After a short silence, Ashes replied, I understand. Very good. Tilly nodded with satisfaction. Maybe I can go to the battlefield with you soon. Oh. Is there any progress on the Aerial Knight project? Roland said that he's trying to combine a new power source with the glider. If it's successful, we can build a new type of glider that can fly freely without Vendi. Tilly said excitedly, but the first thing to be completed is a special glider specially built for me. It's said that it can fly higher and faster than devil beasts. His Majesty won't let you go to the battlefield, and I've already made an agreement with him. Ashes smiled and didn't say this out loud. I'll go to see it on the day of the test flight. Okay. Then I'll take a shower first. My back is sticky after flying the Seagull for a whole day. See you later. You really don't want to shower together? Don't even think about it. Tilly said and slammed the door. Ashes sat down on the bench in the living room and looked at her palms. She could still remember the last strike she had slashed at the demon. At that time, she felt as if she had stepped into a new realm. Even if it was only for a second, it was enough to leave a deep impression. Whether it was vision, movement, or reaction, it was as if she had been separated from the surrounding world. Only magic power was left to accompany her. The overly strong torrent of magic burned her and gave her unparalleled strength. Ashes even felt that the power was responding to her call and tempting her to go further. Magic power not only affects our bodies, but also our temperament. If we desire to use magic power to achieve a certain goal, it will guide us in that direction. So, what are you fighting for? So. The words of the god's punishment which Phyllis during the first expedition to the wilderness rang in her ears. Why are you telling me this? Because you are an extraordinaire. You were born with unimaginable potential. However, in order to truly cross that hurdle, one must have a realistic goal and a firm will. According to the records of the Union, all the transcendents above the transcendent level were promoted in battle, and those who couldn't overcome this hurdle all died in the hands of the demons. I hope you can be the former. Transcendence. Did the three chiefs of the Union also face the same choice? Ashes clenched her fists. Right now, she probably already knew the answer. Roland returned to his office and picked up the call to the administrative office. Connect Barav. Yes, Your Majesty. Soon, the chief's voice was heard from the receiver. What are your orders, Your Majesty? When will the next primary education examination be held? Let me check. According to the plan, it will be in a week. The number of participants is estimated to be 2,650. It seemed that the timing was just right. Roland calculated in his mind. Make a manpower plan. I need to transfer a group of people to implement the new project. Tentatively, about 500 people. Yes, Your Majesty. The current city of Neverwinter was like a huge melting pot that attracted people from all over the kingdom. After completing primary education, they were immediately assigned to various jobs. On the production line, a large number of experienced producers could easily accept these newcomers who had just entered the industry. After the small handicraft workshop model was broken, it became a process system instead of a private collection of knowledge. It became a matter of course for the old to teach the new. When a large number of newcomers became experienced workers, the production scale would be further expanded and more people would be recruited. The foundation that Neverwinter had accumulated over the years could automatically realize this cycle. When the number of people and resources in the melting pot reached a certain scale, the industrialization would be unparalleled. After hanging up the phone, Roland took out a thick stack of blueprints from the drawer. Since the night attack at Tower Station No. 1, he had prepared a lot of plans for the universal response, most of which were collected in the dream world. What he needed to do now was to localize them according to the actual situation in Neverwinter. Among the plans, there was a weapon that was very suitable for the current situation. You have a new idea. Nightingale appeared from the mist. If an infantry squad of the First Army attacked the senior demon first, the senior demon would react after 1 or 2 shots. Then, the senior demon would either hide or wait for an opportunity to counterattack. Originally, the gods' punishment witches were responsible for suppressing the senior demons. They were born to suppress the senior demons. Not only were they as powerful as extraordinaries, but they could also block the enemy's ability. They could be said to be a tit-for-tat existence. However, the senior demons, who were supposed to be the commanders of the army, had appeared on the front lines several times. According to this trend, the 300 gods' punishment witches were not enough. He needed a weapon that could effectively increase the firepower of individual soldiers. RPGs looked great, but rocket-propelled grenades made it impossible for Neverwinter to mass-produce this legendary weapon in a short time. Even the simplest rocket engine was a power system that included fuel and combustion chambers. It was not easy to make one. If Anna had to make and debug it, it would be a waste of its original purpose. Therefore, Roland decided to get rid of the rocket-propelled grenade and leave it with a grenade. It was the ancestor of RPGs, the recoilless grenade. The most famous representative weapon in history was the Iron Fist. Although many people collectively referred to this type of weapon as a rocket launcher, in fact, they were 2 different types of weapons. The biggest difference was that the rocket launcher fired a rocket, which had its own power source and could be launched normally without a barrel. For example, the famous 107 rocket launcher could be ignited by dry batteries with a good accuracy by piling a mound of soil on the ground. The Iron Fist and the RPG were recoilless cannons that needed a barrel to create a recoil force. If it was ignited on the ground, it would only spin on the spot and would not fly away even if it was 1 meter away. Especially for the latter, the rocket at the tail of the warhead was mainly used to increase the range and accuracy, and the power it needed to shoot out was still provided by the propellant. Compared with the constantly evolving younger generations, the biggest advantage of the Iron Fist was its simplicity. The barrel was a straight cylinder, the warhead was made of thin iron sheets, and the propellant was black powder, which was very suitable for large-scale production. Of course, Roland did not intend to copy the Iron Fist, because its simplicity was also its biggest weakness: short range, poor accuracy, and low power, which were all unbearable shortcomings. As a person who learned from history, he naturally knew that some extremely small changes could greatly improve the performance of the weapon. For example, if he installed a gourd-shaped Laval nozzle at the tail of the launcher, it could accelerate the ejected gas from subsonic to supersonic speed, thereby increasing the recoil force and the range of the warhead. If he added a grip, a sight, and a wooden sleeve to the barrel, it could effectively improve the shooting experience and shooting accuracy. He could also install a tail made of soft steel on the body, which would automatically open and rotate with the body to increase its stability. In addition, if he pressed the front part of the warhead into a hollow inverted cone, the explosive energy could be gathered forward, forming a condensed energy armor-piercing effect, which would greatly increase the destructive power of the magic barrier. These improvements were all within the limits of Neverwinter's industrial technology. Roland closed the drawing, stood up, and walked to the French window. Admittedly, even if the First Army was equipped with a large number of individual grenades, it would not be able to completely offset the advantage of the senior demons, but at least the ordinary soldiers had the ability to at least compete with the senior demons. No matter how mobile the senior demons were, the armor-piercing grenades shot from their blind spots were still fatal. As long as they hit the target, the outcome would be completely different. This also meant that with a little bit of training, any ordinary person could be equipped with the means to kill a senior demon. In addition, armored units such as the spider demons and the giant skeletons would not be so helpless against them. And the cost of the above was only a small cluster of gunpowder and half a steel ingot. Chapter 11-12. Joe sat cross-legged on the ground and stared blankly at the 7 crooked bars beside his feet. They were the marks of the number of days. Every day that passed, he would dig a line in the ground with his fingers. Today was the 7th day. He did not dare to think about whether Farina was still alive or whether Lorenzo was still torturing her. Whenever he thought about it, he would feel a stabbing pain in his heart. Joe began to wonder if he had made the wrong choice. Although Sean had agreed to his request and had not been mistreated, Greycastle was too far away from the kingdom of Wolfheart. It would take at least a month for the king of Greycastle to make a decision and send troops to the kingdom of Wolfheart. It would take even longer if he had to discuss, consider, and prioritize other matters. He was not confident that Roland Wimbledon would deal with the internal strife of the church like he dealt with domestic politics. It was even possible that Roland would refuse. In that case, all his efforts would be in vain. Joe lowered his eyes and looked at the chain around his ankle. It connected him to the foot of the bed and was about the length of a man. Perhaps he could use this chain too. "Hey, are you awake?" The tent flap was suddenly lifted and the dazzling light shone in, causing Joe to squint. "You're still awake. In that case, come with us." "Go, where?" The sudden light seemed to interrupt his train of thought. His mind was as blank as the ground. "To the kingdom of Wolfheart, of course. Aren't you in a hurry to save your lover?" Joe's eyes gradually adjusted to the sunlight. It was Sean who was standing in front of him. Then, a key was thrown to him. Joe finally realized the meaning of Sean's words. He grabbed the key with trembling hands and said, Is it? His Majesty has approved the rescue plan and decided to take you back to Neverwinter for trial, Sean said calmly. The team in charge of this operation has arrived at Coral Bay. After meeting up with them, we can head directly to Archduke Island. Already arrived? How could it be so fast? Joe could not believe his ears. But now was not the time to think about this. Joe opened the lock in a flurry. He staggered as he stood up, but he managed to stand up straight. "If you feel unwell, no, please take me there," he pleaded eagerly. The corners of Shaoan's mouth curled up slightly. "Then come." Charles looked back at the mark on the ground. The twisted horizontal bar was imprinted with a silver edge by the sunlight, as if it was shining brightly. He didn't know what kind of future awaited him. But he finally saw a glimmer of hope. Charles took a deep breath and followed the guard out of the tent. One day later. Coral Bay. This was the easternmost port in the Kingdom of Dawn. Compared to the ports closer to Greycastle and the fjords, this port was undoubtedly much more deserted. Ever since the church had swept through the kingdom of Wolfheart and the kingdom of Everwinter, the situation had worsened. The royal family had fallen, and the nobles were fighting for power. Even now, the two kingdoms were still in chaos, and the trade had declined significantly. Most of the ships docked at the pier were flying the flags of the Chamber of Commerce of the Fjords, while ships from the two northern kingdoms were rarely seen. Among these sparse ships, there was one that was rather eye-catching. It had no sail, and black smoke was rising from the top of its head. Large wooden wheels were hanging on both sides, and the hull seemed to be made of stone. The legendary stone ship of Greycastle. Joe thought. Although he had long heard of its existence, it was the first time he saw it with his own eyes. As soon as they boarded the deck, two people immediately came to greet them. It was a man and a woman. Joe's eyes quickly swept over the two people, and his heart sank slightly. For some reason, he vaguely felt that the woman was somewhat familiar, as if he had seen her somewhere before. "Ah, it's Lady Zoe and Lady Betty," Xiao-en greeted them warmly. "Did His Majesty entrust this mission to you?" "Because we happened to be in Neverwinter at that time, and we've been to the Kingdom of Dawn before." The woman shrugged. "If it wasn't for His Majesty, I really wouldn't want to come so far away. The front line is already fighting with the demons, so I should stay there. By the way, instead of calling you lady, I'd rather you call me Mississippi," the man grinned. "Unlike Zoe, I'm one of the last ones to wake up. It's only been 100 years since then." 100 years isn't old enough." The woman glanced at him. "But it's strange. In the dream world, those people all fought to call me Mississippi. Of course, it's not impossible for Her Majesty." "Then call me Mississippi." Xiao-en looked a little helpless. "If you think it's better this way." "Wait, what are they talking about?" Joe looked at him blankly. "Lady? Miss?" No matter how he looked at it, this person was a man. And what did it mean that they had already fought with the demons? The bloody moon did not appear, so what was the demon they were talking about? "Is this the last priest of the church?" The woman called Zoe looked at him up and down. The hope of the Queen of Starfall City was turned into a tool for stupid people to fight for power. Although we used to be enemies, I still feel sorry for her. So, it's a kind of reincarnation for us to end all this. The other man nodded. "Since everyone is here, let's go." "Everyone is here." Joe did not pay attention to the inexplicable words and quickly looked around. This stone ship was not big enough to accommodate an army, but there were no other ships of Greycastle around. "Your Excellency." Joe gritted his teeth and asked. The one who answered him was Zoe. "The rescue team you mentioned is here." "Here." As if to verify his guess, the woman pointed at herself and then at Betty. "She and I are the whole team." Joe looked at Xiao-en in horror. "Your Excellency. Lorenzo has a God's punishment army, 5 people, no more than 10 at most, right?" Xiao-en interrupted him. Joe stared at him blankly and could not even answer with a yes. "Why? Why do the 3 of them look so relaxed?" "That's a monster with an extraordinary body. Ignorance leads to fearlessness." "How is that possible?" Joe was not sure about the others, but Greycastle had fought with the God's Punishment Army in Coldwind Ridge, so they should know this kind of terrifying warrior only better than the church. Even if they had powerful firearms, attacking the castle would weaken their advantage in shooting range. Once they entered a narrow area and encountered Scourge, it would be difficult for them to kill him instantly. After all, they were not afraid of pain and would not stop killing until they could not move. According to his plan, at least 100 to 200 people should enter the castle separately and kill the enemies one by one. Only then could they take down the castle at a low cost. If the number of people was lower than that, the casualties would increase significantly. But, 2 people. How was that possible? Chapter 11-13. More than enough. Translator, Transin editor, Transin facing such an exaggerated statement, Joe should have laughed or tried to persuade him. However, he was rendered speechless by Krone's confident look. What was even more incredible was that he was going to be involved in this operation. He was asked to cooperate fully and tell everything he knew, which was not out of Joe's expectation. Since the king of Grey Castle had promised to rescue Farina, he must have a detailed understanding of the situation on Archduke Island. They had been lurking on the island for half a year, so they were naturally the most familiar with the situation. Of course, Krone might also interrogate him about other things, which Joe planned to tell him at the same time. Farina's life was more important than the secrets of the church and the sacred texts of the gods. He was willing to tell them everything he knew. However, when he entered the cabin, Joe found that he knew nothing about Roland Wimbledon, his old rival who had fought against the church for many years and finally destroyed the holy city of Hermes. It was neither an intelligence interrogation nor a war meeting. Sitting at the end of the long table was Cajun Fells, the master dramatist from Grey Castle. "Just answer whatever he asks," Sean said and left the cabin. After saying this, Sean left the cabin, leaving behind a stupefied Charles, who stared blankly at Sean. When he was still in the new holy city, he had watched Cajun's troupe on tour. Although it had been almost 10 years, he could still remember that the old man in front of him was Cajun. What was the king of Grey Castle thinking? What came with the ship was not the army, but the famous drama troupe. Did this team really come to save people? "Have a seat, my boy." Cajun nodded at him. "Would you like some tea or wine?" "Tea would be fine." A beautiful woman quickly brought him a cup of hot tea. "This is my student, Miss Rentgen." "Ah, thank you," Joe replied in a daze. If it were not for the shackles on his wrists and ankles, he would have thought that he was in a dream. "Why are you here?" "Because of an agreement with His Majesty," Cajun said with a smile. Cajun smiled. "We should have talked in a more comfortable environment, but they wouldn't agree to take off your handcuffs." "No, that's fine," he murmured. "What do you want to ask me?" "It's about Farina's story and your story." Charles looked at him in disbelief. "Are you referring to the matter between me and her?" "That's right." "When did you join the church? How did you meet her? How did she fall into Lorenzo's hands?" "I want to know everything," Cajun said slowly. "Farina. Farina, she." At the mention of this name, the pain surged. He had been trying his best not to think about her, but the memories were like a tide. Once they started, it was difficult to stop. As soon as he opened his mouth, the words were choked in his throat, and his vision became blurry. Farina was just an ordinary civilian girl when she first joined the church. When she first joined the church, her loose, coarse robe was covered with dirty patches. Her hands and feet were swollen from the cold and looked like frozen carrots. On the way to the Hermes Plateau, she would have died if she had not met the carriage he had hired. He was a poor noble who had nothing but his surname. He joined the church just to try his luck. The holy city did not care about one's background, and they would not reject any convert. Since he could read, he was assigned to the department of clergy and became a scribe. Farina, on the other hand, became a trainee warrior. That made Charles very unhappy. Clergy and warriors were equal organizations in the holy city. In other words, a commoner girl had become a person of equal status to him. Moreover, he had saved her by accident. In his eyes, Farina should be a cook, a washerwoman, or some other kind of servant. What annoyed him even more was that after recuperating for a period of time, he actually grew quite well. Therefore, the reason why she was chosen as a warrior was very suspicious. He should have been the one to enjoy it. Taking advantage of his position, he often bullied Farina, and even humiliated her in front of her. Farina did not talk back, which encouraged his arrogance. But in the next few years, this young woman gradually revealed her own talent, like a gem that was gradually being carved into shape. Farina was soon promoted from a trainee warrior to a reserve of the Judgment Army, and then to the official Judgment Army captain. During the months of demons, Charles could always see her figure on the wall of the stronghold. But he had just been promoted from a scribe to a clergy assistant. She was already superior to him. He used to pay close attention to Farina's every move, for fear that she would retaliate against him. However, the latter had never taken any action, and his attention had turned into a habit. Charles gradually found that she was not as ordinary as he thought. Then Prince Roland of Greycastle came. The Pope died, the gods' punishment army was destroyed, and the cathedral collapsed. The huge church of Hermes seemed to fall apart overnight. Countless believers fled the holy city that night. Farina was ordered to support the crumbling judgment army. She also pulled him out of the crowd during the civil strife. If it were not for that hand, he would have been trampled into meat paste by the refugees. At that moment, he seemed to understand something. After the defeat in Coldwind Ridge, Farina was not the highest person in the church. There were still the officiant, the presiding judge, and the senior commander in the holy city. The reason why the responsibility of defending the holy city was handed over to her was not so much because they valued her, but because they wanted to shirk and abandon her. The same was true when Tucker Thor was elected as the acting pope. Everyone knew that it was impossible to defend the holy city, but no one was willing to take the blame. At the same time, they needed someone to temporarily stabilize the situation in the holy city, so as to buy time for their escape. Therefore, the miracle of a woman in her 20s becoming the supreme commander of the judgment army appeared in Hermes. Ironically, she tried her best to restore the order in the old and new holy cities, but the number of senior officers who stayed was getting fewer and fewer. It was not uncommon for people to leave and leave at night. When the months of demons ended, there were only about 500 judgment warriors left in the holy city. She was thrown to Roland Wimbledon by those people, as a sacrifice to buy time. Did Farina know nothing about it? No, she knew the meaning of this responsibility from the beginning. But she still stood up without hesitation and spared no effort to do her best. Just because the church accepted her and trained her until now. Just like she never retaliated against him, not even scolded him. Just because he gave her a lift. Seeing Farina drenched in sweat running back and forth, standing on top of the city wall and shouting loudly, Charles felt something touched in his heart. Her small figure swaying under the white snow was so eye-catching, the sweat dripping from the tip of her nose was more dazzling than a gem. For Charles, the church was just an opportunistic place. He should have left long ago, but he chose to stay. It had nothing to do with God. He made a vow to Farina in his heart, swearing allegiance. It was not the loyalty of the believers to the commander of the judgment army. It was the loyalty of the knight to follow the guardian. Chapter 11:14. 2 days later. Joe was taken out of his room and stepped onto the bow deck. "Is that Earl Lorenzo's territory?" Sean asked. In the morning sun, the seawall glowed with golden light, and a vague gray and white shadow floated above it. Joe's heart tightened. He could not help but grasp the railing tightly and lean forward, fearing that he would miss any detail. "Yes, that's the Archduke Island." He finally came back with the rescuer. "Farina, please hold on a little longer. There are 2 docks on the island, facing east and west respectively." Joe took a deep breath and said impatiently, "Ever since Lorenzo became a noble, the docks have been guarded by guards. But mainly to guard against other nobles in the kingdom of Wolfheart, merchant ships are not strictly inspected. The problem is the castle district, which is heavily guarded. Without a special permit, you can't even enter." He had been holding it in for a long time. Over the past 2 days, Cajun Fells had asked him many questions, but none of them were related to the mission, let alone the secrets of the church. Cajun asked Farina in great detail about his prejudice against her, his insults, his escape, and how they helped each other. When he could not express himself in words, Cajun even asked his disciple, Renkin, to pretend to be Farina and try to reconstruct the scenes in his memory. Except for mealtimes, he could not even see Sean and the others. It was as if they did not care about the rescue mission at all. Therefore, Joe seized the opportunity to speak his mind as fast as he could. Regardless of whether the other side would listen to him or not, as long as it was useful, he would have a better chance of rescuing Farina. You don't have to worry about that. We have our own ways, Sean interrupted him. I asked you to meet someone and get to know him. Who is it? The guide of this mission. After he finished speaking, he whistled, and two sailors quickly escorted a middle-aged man over. Charles recognized the man at a glance. Hagrid, you traitor. Hagrid was also a follower of the church. Before he was transferred to assist Bishop Lorenzo, Hagrid had been Joe's superior. TSK, Hagrid said disdainfully. You speak as if you are loyal to the church. If Farina finds out that you've sided with Greycastle, who knows who she'll call a traitor? Charles was at a loss for words. There's no need to argue. Sean stood between the two. Mr. Hagrid, you should know your mission, right? Facing the king's personal guard, Hagrid's voice immediately became much softer. Yes, my lord. Bring those two warriors into the castle. This is your only chance to redeem yourself. Whether you can grasp it or not is up to you. Entering the castle is not a problem, but sir, are you sure that only two will be enough? He was actually worried about Greycastle. Joe was stunned for a while before he came to his senses. No matter how many people Hagrid brought in, it would be an intolerable betrayal to Lorenzo. If Greycastle failed, he would not have a good ending either, so he might as well hope that Hagrid could be more thorough. Don't worry. You'll soon see. Sean looked at the outline of the Archduke Island and sneered. They're the real scourge who has obtained power. In the dead of night, the 6 members of the rescue team left the dock and headed for the castle. In addition to Zoe and Betty, there were 2 soldiers from the First Army. Obviously, they were responsible for guarding Joe and Hagrid. With the Count's trusted aide as a guide, the journey could be said to be unimpeded. Even if the patrol team came to question them, they would be dismissed by Hagrid with a few words. The same went for the guards at the entrance of the castle. Even though the other 5 people were all wearing hoods, the guards did not question them. From this point of view, Hagrid was indeed trusted by Lorenzo. After passing through the courtyard, the Lord's castle appeared in front of them. According to Hagrid, Farina's attack had frightened Earl Lorenzo so much that he had gathered all the God's Punishment Army soldiers who could still move into the bedroom in the main building. There were no more than 6 of them. The bedroom door had also been replaced with a solid copper door. It was said that ordinary people could not even push it open, let alone break the lock. Usually, Scourge had to open the copper door to get in and out of the bedroom. It's not difficult to trick Lorenzo out of the bedroom. You just need to say that you found the secret of the treasure, Hagrid said as they walked. But he'll definitely take Scourge with him. Besides, strangers in the hall will make the guards even more vigilant. We have to find a way to fool them, no need. Just tell us which floor the bedroom is on. Zoe shrugged. Then take Joe to the dungeon and rescue the woman. As for how we fight, it's none of your business. Hagrid was stunned for a moment before he replied, yes. I got it. He straightened his bow tie, climbed the stone steps, and knocked on the side door. An old gatekeeper poked his head out and said, Lord Hagrid, why didn't you inform us beforehand that you were coming back? Cut the crap. I have something important to report to the Earl. Get out of the way. Okay. The old man hurriedly stepped aside to make way for Hagrid. But these people are my informants in the Cage Mountain. Why, do you want to pry into the Earl's secret? I dare not. The old man immediately lowered his head. After entering the room through the side door and passing through 2 partitions, they entered the castle. The guards at the entrance of the hall had been replaced by armored family guards. Seeing them, 2 guards grasped the hilts of their swords at their waists and approached them. Lorenzo's bedroom is on the 4th floor. But I can't take you up there. Hagrid said in a low voice. Oh, isn't this Lord Hagrid? The Earl has been talking about you recently. Are these the guests that you invited? The guard bowed and turned to Zoe and the others. Please wait outside the hall unless the Earl approves. Wait, this lady. Zoe lifted her hood and slowly walked toward him. Before he could finish his warning, a hand grabbed his neck. Lord Hagrid, this. The other guard did the same. Before he could draw his sword, Betty's hand had already grabbed his neck. Crack. With a crisp sound, the guard's neck was suddenly twisted into a corner. Hagrid and Joe could not help but gasp. Breaking a person's neck with one hand, was this something that a human could do? But that was not all. They carried the guards into the hall and hid themselves behind them. This strange scene made the remaining guards unable to react immediately. Hey, what the hell are you doing? No. No, look, their feet aren't on the ground. What? The dim firelight affected everyone's vision. When they realized something was wrong, it was too late. Zoe and Betty flashed out like shadows and pounced on the unprepared guards, aiming at their exposed necks. It was easy for people to relax during the long night watch, and their opponents just happened to be the strongest warriors among humans, extraordinaires. Joe could not help but cover his mouth. In just a few seconds, the remaining 4 guards' necks were also broken, and they fell to the ground in disorder. He had only seen such overwhelming strength and speed from the God's Punishment Army. But the God's Punishment Army was obviously a group of monsters without the ability to think. It was not difficult for them to tear their enemies apart with their bare hands, but it was almost impossible for them to kill them silently and cleverly like this. He saw the same shock on Hagrid's face. They have gained full power. They are the real scourge. Sean's words echoed in Joe's mind. Was this also Roland Wimbledon's masterpiece? He was not sure that His Holiness the Supreme Pontiff knew this secret the best. Next, act according to the plan. Zoe glanced at Joe. No matter whether the person you want to save is dead or alive, don't stay in the dungeon. Do you understand? I understand. After getting the answer, the two turned around and ran toward the stairs. There were no guards on the stairs, so Zoe and Betty went straight up to the 4th floor. There were doors on both sides of the narrow corridor, which should be for maids or servants. At the end of the corridor was a huge metal door, which reflected a dark red light under the flickering candlelight. It's really a copper door. Zoe raised her eyebrows. What are you going to do? Betty curled her lips. If there's an iron lock behind it, I don't think it can be broken. Isn't that obvious? If there's no way, then we'll open a way. I think that's true. Betty kicked open the wooden door next to the Lord's bedroom and strode into the room. Ah, a scream was heard. The maid, who only had a thin veil over her body, suddenly pulled up the quilt to cover her half-exposed chest. Who are you? Unfortunately, I'm not interested in girls. Betty untied her belt, and her robe slid down naturally, revealing a firearm with an astonishing caliber on her back. If it's a handsome boy, you'll only make her more panicked. Zoe sighed and held the shotgun in her hand. 1, 2, 3. The two aimed the muzzles at the wall and pulled the triggers together. Deafening explosions sounded continuously. The interior walls made of brick simply could not withstand the repeated bombardment of the 40mm ammunition. Under the flying debris, 2 rows of crooked bullet holes quickly appeared on the walls. Chapter 11-15. Amidst the smoke and dust, she immediately spotted the target of this operation. Count Lorenzo. Apparently, he had just woken up from a sweet dream. He was sitting on the edge of the bed and putting on his pants in a panic. Scourge, who was guarding the bed, had already pulled out his dagger and pounced on the collapsed wall. Breaking through the wall had obviously violated the bottom line of these bodies. As long as the prior order was to kill any enemy that broke into the room, even if the controller was unconscious, Scourge would automatically respond. Betty! Zoe shouted. Understood. The latter followed closely behind, kneeling on one leg and clenching her hands into bowls. Come on. Long-term training and cooperation had made the two of them telepathic. Zoe did not even look back and directly jumped backward. Betty caught her accurately. With a push of her hands, Zoe leaped into the air and flew over Scourge's head like a swallow. Then, she grabbed the chandelier on the arched ceiling and swayed. In the blink of an eye, she was already on top of the bed. The spacious and luxuriously furnished bedroom provided a very comfortable space for the Lord to enjoy and also became her stage. Zoe directly raised the shotgun in the air. Time seemed to stop. Scourge was still turning around, but obviously, it was too late for him to keep up with her. Betty, on the other hand, had her back to the big bed and put on a victory pose. Obviously, this bad habit came from the dream world. Real men never turned around to look at explosions, and the aesthetics of combat. She did not even consider that it was all magic movie special effects. However, seeing that Betty only tilted her body and was still paying attention to Scourge's movements, Zoe did not bother to argue with her. As for Count Lorenzo, he looked up in horror, his eyes full of disbelief. From the moment he fired the shotgun until now, only a few dozen seconds had passed. For him, he probably never thought that the defense line formed by Scourge would be so fragile. The chandelier fell apart under the tremendous force, and burning candles danced in the air like flickering fireflies. In the midst of the flames, Zoe aimed at the target and pulled the trigger. Boom! With a loud bang, time resumed its flow. A mist of blood instantly rose from the Count's body. Dozens of steel balls fell from above and almost completely enveloped him. Under the powerful impact, he first sank, then bounced up, and when he landed again, he was already twisted into a ball like a rag. Zoe's feet then stepped on the bed, and the bed frame that had been ravaged finally couldn't take it anymore. With a bang, it collapsed into a pile of broken wood. At the same time, Scourge suddenly stopped moving. Except for the imperfect landing, you got full marks for everything else. Betty whistled. It would be even better if you had a pair of sunglasses. Zoe rolled her eyes at her. Let's recycle the body first before talking nonsense. Yes, yes. Betty shrugged, took out a small horn from her waist pocket, put it to her mouth, and blew it. It was a special tune, and it was also a fragment of Scourge's memory during the transformation process. For an ownerless body, it was equivalent to an activation command. From now on, I'm your new master, Betty cleared her throat and said word by word. The six Scourge clenched their fists in front of their chests. But only until we return to Neverwinter. When we arrive at the third border city, you'll be thrown into the storage room for everyone to use. If you're good-looking, you'll have a chance to see the light of day again. Otherwise, you'll be scrapped. Of course, I don't think you'll have much hope, Betty said half-jokingly, although she knew these bodies wouldn't react at all. The magic blood had destroyed the self-consciousness of the original owners. Zoe opened the bronze door and saw many guards rushing toward the Lord's bedroom at the end of the corridor. She also heard hurried footsteps upstairs and downstairs. Apparently, the short battle had completely broken the peace of the night, and the entire castle district had entered a state of defense. Do you see those guys in armor? Betty smiled. Go and kill them. As soon as she finished speaking, the gods' punishment warriors rushed out from behind her like wild beasts. They raised their swords and rushed toward the guards. Under the surprised and puzzled gazes of the guards, the gods' punishment warriors thrust their swords into their chests. The castle seemed to be boiling. With the soldiers of the First Army clearing the way and Hagrid covering for them, Joe entered the dungeon without any trouble. However, when he saw Farina hanging on the rack, he felt as if his chest had been smashed by a hammer, and an indescribable pain gripped his heart. The dazzling woman was now like a piece of dead wood that had been drained of all vitality, hanging powerlessly on the chain. There was hardly a patch of smooth skin on her body, and the crisscrossed whip marks spread from her shoulders to her legs. Places like the back and chest were the main areas of destruction. Thick liquid was flowing from the red and swollen marks, which were obviously wounds that had not been properly treated after being burned by a soldering iron. Judging from the interrogation, she did not choose to surrender to Lorenzo even though she had been tortured like this. Joe trembled as he walked toward her, feeling that every step was extremely difficult. However, the soldiers reacted faster. They untied the chains and released Farina from the rack. "Is this the person you want to save? Don't just stand there, come and help." "Ah. Yes." Joe seemed to have woken up from a dream. He picked up Farina and laid her flat on the straw couch. The soldier seemed to have been prepared for this. He took out a bunch of bottles and jars from his backpack and began to give her emergency treatment. Although Joe did not know what the effects of those potions were, he could tell from Farina's gradually calming breathing that they were effective. While he was helping to bandage her wounds, Farina suddenly moaned and opened her eyes slightly. How could it be you?" she murmured. "Am I dreaming?" "No, it's not a dream. It's all over." Joe held her face in his hands and replied in a choked voice. "All over?" Farina paused for a moment. "I see. I'm dead, right? That's why I saw you in the dungeon." She slowly raised her hand and touched Joe's cheek with her twisted fingers. Lorenzo had not only pulled out her nails, but also broken her fingers one by one. At that moment, it looked more like a withered branch than a hand. "I'm sorry that I couldn't continue the church. I've let you down, I don't care at all." Joe felt a warm trickle down his cheeks. "And it's not your fault at all. Are you comforting me? Strange. You've never been like this before." Farina's bloody lips parted. "No matter what, don't go away. Stay with me for a while, okay?" Joe could no longer hold back his tears and hugged her tightly. "I'll stay with you. No matter where you go, I'll be by your side, even if I die." Chapter 11:16. Farina had a dream. The whizzing of the whip, the cursing of the enemy, and the excruciating pain gradually left her. Everything around her was pure white, and the ground was so smooth that it could reflect her appearance. This world seemed to have no boundaries, and the only landmark was a tall stone gate in the distance. Behind the gate, there was a faint melody, sacred and pleasant. "Maybe this is what people see before they die," she thought to herself. After walking this last distance, she would arrive at the land of eternal peace. Farina was not satisfied. In the end, she could not kill the traitor with her own hands and avenge everyone who followed her here. At the same time, she felt a lot of guilt. Tokhtar's task had gone down the drain. She was indeed not a person who could shoulder the responsibility alone, and she was not even a qualified leader. Her talent was just a so-so. The only reassuring thing was that she didn't beg for mercy in the end. Especially when the red-hot iron needle pierced her fingertip, she almost thought she would completely collapse in the next moment. Now that she thought about it, she still felt it was a bit unbelievable that she could hold on until the end. Otherwise, she would not be able to face her comrades who died one step ahead of her. However, these emotions did not last long, and they scattered like dust. After all, she would soon enter her eternal sleep. No matter how she thought about it, there was no way to change it, was there? Farina walked towards the stone gate step by step. According to the legends, there would be no more pain or sorrow there, and time would be frozen. Everything would remain in its most glorious moment, and it would be the cornerstone of God's kingdom forever. This should have been something to be happy about, but for some reason, she did not feel happy. Why is this? Farina, just when she was at a loss, a hazy voice came from beside her. She remembered now. It was Joe's voice. He did not participate in the attack, so he could not have been captured by Lorenzo, so it was just her imagination. Even so, Farina suddenly felt relieved. So that's what happened, she thought. She just didn't want to finish this last journey alone. Even if she was entrusted with a responsibility that was beyond her ability, even if it was to shirk responsibility, she did not care. She longed for the feeling of being needed. She did not want to go on alone anymore. Don't go away. Stay with me for a while, okay? I will. The voice replied intermittently. No matter where you go, I will be by your side, even in death. That was enough. Even if it was an illusion. She seemed to have returned to that winter several years ago, when she climbed Hermes alone. Just as she was about to collapse, a carriage stopped in front of her. Farina stepped onto the steps of the stone door and pushed it open. Thank you. The light behind the door shot out in all directions and instantly enveloped her. When the light dissipated, Farina opened her eyes and found that the ceiling above her head was shaking slowly. Is this what the divine kingdom looks like? It didn't look as glamorous as he had imagined. Furthermore, time did not seem to stop flowing. She tried to turn her head and saw a familiar face. Farina hesitated for a moment and asked tentatively, Joe? Joe was lying next to her as if he had fallen asleep. After calling his name a few times, he opened his sleepy eyes and looked at her. Then, an ecstatic expression appeared on Joe's face. You're awake. Awake? Farina frowned. Shouldn't I have, Before she could finish her sentence, she felt the burning pain return to her body. Even the slightest movement was excruciating. You just fainted from exhaustion. Joe covered her head. Don't worry. Everything will be fine. Farina could not help but be stunned. After a long while, she came to her senses. Not only did she not die, but she also escaped from the dungeon. Did this mean, Lorenzo, he's dead? After getting this unexpected answer, Farina suddenly felt refreshed. Really? How did you do it? It wasn't me who killed him. Joe shook his head. It was the King of Greycastle, His Majesty Roland Wimbledon. Roland Wimbledon. It was a name that she did not want to hear the most. What are you talking about? How could he possibly help us take back Archduke Island? She suddenly looked around and asked, wait a minute, where is this place? Aren't we on Archduke Island? We're now on the sea, and our destination is Greycastle's city of Neverwinter. You've been in a coma for 3 days. You only survived because of the First Army's medicine, Joe said softly. Don't worry. I'll tell you everything. An hour later, Farina finally understood what had happened behind the scenes. I've also asked Sean about His Majesty's trial, Joe said. As long as you don't have the witch's blood on your hands, don't participate in the persecution, and don't slaughter the people of Greycastle, you won't be sentenced to death. You're a warrior of the Vanguard Battalion, and you've been stationed in the new holy city all year round to fight against demonic beasts. I used to be a priest's assistant, so I can't meet those witches. In other words, both of us can survive. He became more excited as he spoke. Although you're badly injured, there's a witch named Nana in Neverwinter. She can cure any kind of injury as long as you pay. I'll find a way to pay for it. No matter how much she wants, I'll definitely help you stand up again. In order to prevent her from escaping, Lorenzo had broken the tendons in her hands and feet and smashed her knees with a hammer. She was now a cripple. But this was not the focus of Farina's attention. Because of me, what? Because of me, you made a deal with that devil? She rebuked him angrily. He destroyed the church and all hope. How can you face Lord Tuckerthor? Cough, cough. Farina. Don't touch me. She choked and spat out some blood. The fate of the world, the fate of all human beings, was destroyed by him alone. How can you ask him for help? Compared to the battle of divine will, my life is not worth mentioning. Even if you save me, what's the point? I'd rather go to hell and wait for him, until the moment he falls into the abyss. Clap, clap, clap. Suddenly, there was a round of applause outside the room. I'm so touched. I didn't expect to receive such support from mortals after more than 400 years. What a surprise. A woman pushed the door open and walked in. I support the church that strives for the future of human beings, not the minions of the king of Grey Castle. Farina endured the sharp pain in her chest and scolded. But before she could finish her words, she was stunned. Inova. Legion Commander. At that moment, she almost suspected that there was something wrong with her eyes. In the martial arts hall of the new holy city hung the portraits of the outstanding leaders of the Judgment Army. Most of them had received the highest honor bestowed by the Pope, the Scourge Transformation Ceremony. They could be regarded as the elites of the elites. Inova had served as the Legion Commander of the Judgment Army, which could be said to be the highest rank a female warrior could reach. Because of this, Farina had always regarded her as her goal. But the problem was, Inova was a figure from more than 100 years ago. Chapter 11:17. Commander. Your Excellency. It took Joe quite a while to realize the identity of Farina and why he had felt a sense of familiarity when they first met. However, how could this be possible? I can't understand. You should have died bravely in the defense battle during the months of demons. Farina swallowed. And Scourge is a pious warrior who has dedicated his body and mind to God. They almost never speak, like a mute. Zoe interrupted. This has nothing to do with piety. They can't speak only because their brains have been cleaned. If they don't do this, they can't become a qualified body for us to use. Body? Use? What are you talking about? Let me ask you first. How did the church promote the God's punishment army? Joe answered first. Warriors who have the power of God are the nemesis of evil witches and the church's greatest hope to save the world. Only determined and fearless believers can have this honor. He paused for a while. We used to think that saving the world was to guard the big breach and prevent demonic beasts from invading the mainland. However, we learned about the battle of divine will and the existence of demons in the will of Lord Tok'tar. So the God's punishment army is actually a special force to fight against demons, Farina continued. Only Hermes' Privy Council knows how to carry out the transformation ceremony, but now Roland Wimbledon has ruined everything. It sounds really touching, but it's a pity that none of it is true. Zoe smiled contemptuously. Your so-called God's punishment army was created for the sole purpose of suppressing witches and maintaining the rule of usurpers. Although the origin of all this is to continue the human race, the one who made the plan is not the church, but the witches. Farina had a look of disbelief on her face. If the other party was not the famous Inova, who was her idol, she would have retorted loudly. Joe took a deep breath. Can you tell us more about it? Well, let me satisfy your curiosity, mortals. Zoe smiled. When the man stopped talking, Farina felt a sharp pain in her fingers. She did not know when she had clenched her fists, but her broken fingers were bleeding again. She finally understood why the historical figures had appeared so vividly in front of her. The Inova in front of him was not the Judgment Army commander, but an ancient witch who had lived for more than 400 years. Normally, she would have shouted blasphemy and drawn her sword to fight to the death. Even if she couldn't win, she couldn't allow an evil person to control the corpse of a hero. But now, she felt that all the strength in her body was slipping away from her fingers. This was ridiculous. This was simply too absurd. According to him, the witches had single-handedly created all of this. Minions of the devil? The incarnation of evil? What a joke. They were the ones who sacrificed everything for humanity. They were the true fearless heroes. The Queen of Starfall City's courage to sacrifice herself had surpassed most people in the world. Was there anything more ironic than this? The goal that she was proud of was set by the witches that she was hostile to. The transformation ceremony that she yearned for was just a body for the witches. Even the reason why the world had become what it was now was inseparable from the witches. Refute her, say that all of this is fake, fabricated. Although there was a voice in her heart shouting, Farina opened her mouth, but no words came out. Because there were too many details that could be matched. For example, the rumor of Scourge's mysterious disappearance. For example, the female corpses that seemed to have been sucked dry. For example, the huge monastery in the old holy city. For example, the pure witches who looked no different from witches. If the lies could be so perfect, they had to have been lurking in the church for at least decades, and had access to the core secrets of the Privy Council. At present, the only people who could meet these conditions were the popes of the past. Moreover, there was another decisive piece of evidence, and that was power. Since the ultimate goal of Scourge was to fight against the devil, it was no doubt that the stronger the better. There was no doubt that intelligent life with divine sense would always be much stronger than beasts without divine sense. The fact that only 2 witches could easily conquer the castle on Archduke Island guarded by Scourge was proof. If witches and gods' punishment bodies were so compatible, why did the church kill them instead of making good use of them? Even if wild witches were extremely evil, the pure witches should be suitable. But the fact was that there had never been a god's punishment witch in Hermes. She had come to a conclusion in her mind. The pure witches could be controlled by God's stone. However, the church had no means to control a god's punishment witch who was equivalent to an extraordinary. Therefore, no matter how strong the latter was, they would not consider it. If His Holiness in the Holy City was really wholeheartedly for humanity, she believed that there were many believers who were willing to sacrifice themselves, and it was not surprising that there were a few witches among them. However, from the beginning, the Holy City had cut off this possibility. Saving the world was not as important as they claimed. It was as if they were mocking her. She thought helplessly, Scourge was not a trump card against the devil, but a tool to suppress witches. That was all. Obviously, Joe was also aware of this contradiction. He asked cautiously, "How many people like you are there in Neverwinter?" "Hundreds of them," Zoe shrugged. "And they're all using the bodies you've given us. In the future, don't make a fuss when you meet someone you know." Farina vaguely guessed the reason why Joe asked such a question. If 1 or 2, sacrificed, Scourge could be impersonated by a witch, it was absolutely impossible for hundreds of them to be impersonated. The fact that Joe could answer so calmly was a proof in itself. Even the last trace of luck was gone. Farina felt that something in her heart was gradually leaving her. She longed for the feeling of being needed. The church originally carried light and hope, and as a member of the church, she naturally shouldered these responsibilities. Behind her were the 4 kingdoms and the entire human race. But now, they were peeling away bit by bit, like a mottled and weathered wall. Behind the wall, there was nothing, like the nothingness in a dream. She had to do something. The church can change this result, put everything back on the right track. Farina said with difficulty. What? Zoe looked at her. The God's Punishment Witches Project needs bodies, right? Only the church can provide them for you, such as me. She took a deep breath and said, "I'm willing to lead the transformation." Oh. Zoe revealed a playful smile. Even if you lose your mind? Farina. Joe shouted. If that would help humans in this way, there would be light behind her, and she would still be needed. Interesting, mortal. But Zoe mercilessly shattered her fantasy. But the God's Punishment Witches project has long been abandoned. Why? Because it's useless. Zoe spread out her hands and said, according to the situation 400 years ago, it might have the power to fight, but now the demons can't be defeated by the God's Punishment Witches alone. So we all turn to the common king of Greycastle. It's that simple. Farina opened her mouth, but could only make some hissing sounds. No matter how weak a living witch is, as long as we find the right direction, she'll be far more useful than magic blood and a body. Although His Majesty discovered this, we're also very good at learning, and now it's basically a common understanding. Zoe stood up and walked to the door. That is to say, even if you're willing to become a body, know which will donate her blood, because it's not worth it. She stopped when she passed the threshold and looked back with a smile. I'll be frank. The church's appearance was a mistake from the beginning. In an instant, Farina heard a crisp sound. Chapter 11:18. You rarely talk so much to a mortal. When they walked out of the cabin, Betty, who had been waiting by the aisle, followed them. I talk more to His Majesty, Zoe said carelessly. But we all know that he's not a real mortal. Betty pretended to feel sorry. Sean only wanted you to talk about the origin of the church. After all, the gods' punishment witches are more persuasive. But look at what you're saying. It's not worth it at all, it was a mistake from the beginning, tsk tisk, she's still a patient. Aren't you afraid that she won't be able to catch her breath and suffocate to death? Our mission is to recover the ancient treasure and rescue the captive believers. As for whether she lives or dies, what does it have to do with me? Zoe stopped and looked back at Betty. I say, when did you start to care so much about a mortal? Shouldn't people care about each other? Anyone but you wouldn't say something like that. Zoe paused. Wait, you're just gloating, aren't you? Don't say it out loud. Betty laughed. Because I think the same thing as you. Sure enough, Zoe sighed. She does look like one. Yes, they're practically carved from the same mold. Betty walked up to Zoe and leaned over the porthole. If she was born 400 years earlier. If she was also a witch, then at the last meeting of the Union. She would have chosen to follow Lady Alice instead of us, Zoe said. That's why it's so infuriating. Farina didn't look like a person, but a group of people. A group of Union witches who had survived and had a bleak future ahead of them. There weren't many choices left in front of them. Even so, most of them did not give up hope. Compared to the chosen one, who had no clue, the gods' punishment witches' plan, which relied on their own strength to achieve their goals step by step, won more people's support, even if it meant sacrificing themselves. In that fateful meeting, Alice had completely overwhelmed Natalia. The shouts of "humans shall never perish, witches shall live forever," were almost the only voices in the meeting. In fact, even many of Natalia's followers were hesitant, not knowing whether they could see the light of day on this road. She could only stand aside and worry for Queen Chaser, unable to get a word in. His attitude towards Farina was just to vent his anger on her. What Zoe wanted to refute was not a believer of the church, but the union of the past. She wanted to tell them that the weak witches still had a chance to make a comeback. She wanted to tell them that ignorant and short-sighted mortals were not completely useless. What she really wanted to say was, just wait a little longer, don't draw your sword against each other because of differences. But in the end, all these thoughts turned into a sigh. If they could not produce conclusive evidence, even if they had to start all over again, the three chiefs would definitely walk the same path. In that precarious and gloomy moment, only those with a heart of steel could lead the people forward. If only Alice, Eleanor, and Lady Natalia could see all of this, how great would it be, Zoe murmured, looking at the boundless blue sea. On the other side of the room, Cajun put down his pen in surprise. Teacher, this. Rentgen was equally shocked. She obviously did not expect to hear such a subversive conversation. Don't tell me we know too much. In order to better understand the story between Charles and Farina, Sean had specially prepared a cabin next to the ward for the two of them to use as a study. He had also tampered with the partition wall. A seemingly ordinary glass mirror used for decoration had the ability to transmit light in one direction. Through this hole in the wall that was a few inches wide, they could clearly see the situation in the entire room. In addition, there were also two loudspeakers in the corner of the wall, so they could clearly hear the conversation on the other side of the wall. This was also the first time for Cajun Fells to have such an observation experience. Although he knew it was not appropriate, he could not resist the temptation. What could be more realistic than this? The people in the room were like actors, performing a play called reality, and he was the audience and the recorder. They had thought it was a story about love and redemption, but they had instead heard about the unknown past of the church. This news was too shocking for them. The four kingdoms all originated from the Witch Empire. The church was created by the Witch Union. And the ancient witches even had the means to occupy the bodies of ordinary people. No matter what news it was, it would cause a huge uproar. Rentgen looked at the door anxiously, as if she would be thrown into the sea at any moment by the guards who would rush in, put her in a sack, and throw her into the sea. His Majesty's words came to Cajun's mind. It reflects the flower of love that was bred in the darkest of times. I think you understand what I mean by adaptation. Perhaps. His Majesty had predicted all this. No matter what, it was impossible for him to get out of it. Even if he could, he would not do so. Cajun had a hunch that something bad was about to happen. This play would be an unprecedented milestone. Just then, Rentgen began to move again. He hurriedly picked up the loudspeaker. In the end, it turned out like this. Farina's eyes seemed to have lost focus. She was looking at Cajun, but her eyes seemed to penetrate him and fall on the empty space. The church is gone, and no one needs me anymore. You saved me, but I can't give you anything in return. I'm sorry. Her voice was getting lower and lower, as if she would leave at any time. Cajun grabbed her hand, his heart aching. I didn't save you for the church. His voice was so loud that Farina couldn't help but be stunned. I didn't have any hope for the church from the beginning. I just wanted to get by. I pretended to be pious in front of everyone because it would help me get promoted. I used to be a noble. How could I give everything to God? You. Farina bit her lip. Her eyes became focused again. She struggled to raise her hand, as if she was going to slap Cajun. Cajun did not move. He even slightly raised his head. Cajun did not slap Rentgen. You're lying to me, aren't you? You followed me to the kingdom of Wolfheart after the defeat of the God's punishment army. How could you not have any hope for the church? Cajun grabbed her arm. Because I want to be by your side. The Supreme Pontiff and the Battle of Divine Will are all bullshit in my eyes. Cajun. Let me finish. He had been waiting for this opportunity for too long. He had thought that he had lost Rentgen forever. Now that he had a chance, he would not let it go. After I learned that you were captured, I tried everything I could to save you. None of them had anything to do with Hermes' future. I knew that even without the church, the world would be the same to me. Only you. I don't want to lose you. I need you. Crack. The tip of the quill in Cajun's hand broke. Need me. Farina was stunned. Chapter 11:19. A week later, in the valley of the impassable mountain range. Since the last napalm test, this place had become a new weapon testing site. It was closer to the North Slope laboratory, and no matter how loud the noise was, it would be hard to attract the public's attention. With the development of the misty forest, the flow of people inside and outside the northwest city wall was much higher than before. Obviously, the previous method of testing weapons in an isolated area on the grassland was no longer suitable. Considering that the power of weapons would further increase in the future, it was reasonable to move the testing site. And this time, the weapon Roland was going to test was the single anti-demon grenade that he had previously decided to research. Due to the overall industrial progress and sufficient preparation of materials, it only took 5 days from the trial production to the actual firing, which was the fastest time in the history of weapon development in Neverwinter. Of course, this had something to do with the exceptionally simple structure of the single anti-demon grenade. In the other world, even the weakest extremists could make huge RPGs out of gas tanks and drainage pipes. If they were installed on pickup trucks, they could even turn them into multi-mounted self-propelled artillery, not to mention Neverwinter, which was supported by an entire industrial system. Just aim the warhead at the target and press the trigger, right? Alxia asked excitedly as she rolled up the launcher with her tentacles. Apparently, as a former senior blessed warrior, she was very interested in new firearms, not to mention that this weapon was specially developed to fight against demons. However, this scene was a little strange in Roland's eyes. A gigantic blob-like monster with tentacles all over its body was a common character in horror stories. Some of them shot light from their eyes, some relied on swords, guns, and shields, and some relied on powerful suction cups and secreted special liquids to fight against the heroes. But what about holding an RPG? Ugh! Something was not quite right. However, Roland had asked the original carrier to be a tester for safety reasons. Once the single anti-demon grenade accidentally exploded, the soldiers operating it at close range would basically end up in the same situation. Even the gods' punishment witches would not fare any better. Only the original carrier could extend its tentacles to a safe place to avoid a tragedy. Just don't let the tail point at yourself or others. Roland coughed twice. Let's begin. Alxia pointed at the main tentacle and pressed the trigger. A streak of fire shot out of the muzzle and headed straight for the target that was 100 meters away. After drawing a shallow arc, the bullet accurately hit the bottom of the target. Accompanied by an explosion, the metal box that was used as the target rolled back twice, seemingly unharmed. Compared to the earth-shattering bombardment of the Longsong cannons or the overwhelming napalm flames, this was arguably the experiment with the least noise. In fact, not to mention the flames of the explosion, even the dust and gravel that were stirred up were few and far between. In just a few seconds, they were all blown away by the mountain breeze. The atmosphere was a little awkward. Only Roland smiled. Go get it for me to take a look. Soon, two gods' punishment witches ran back with the metal box. Only after observing it from a close distance did everyone notice that the bottom of the box was white, as if it had been burned by something. In the center of the white spot, there was an inconspicuous dent about the thickness of 3 fingers. It pierced through? Pasha asked curiously. Although it wasn't slow when it flew, it wasn't fast either. At least, it was much more eye-catching than a bullet. Revolver muskets can't pierce through this box, right? Even a Mark I-type heavy machine gun might not be able to do it. Alxia leaned over. This iron coffin is a complete imitation of the stone pillar that the spider demons threw. It's covered with a finger-thick steel plate in every direction, so it won't be easy to pierce through. Right, isn't there a test subject inside? Let's open it and have a look. She stretched out 2 tentacles and lifted the heavy lid of the box. Everyone immediately let out a low cry of surprise. In order to simulate the demon in the stone pillar, several live chickens were stuffed into the box and hung on the wall with iron wires. But now, there were only a few pieces of meat left inside, as well as a layer of chicken feathers that emitted a burnt smell. Looks like it worked well, Roland nodded with satisfaction. He was not surprised by the result. On the contrary, it was even more surprising that Alxia could hit the target on her first try. According to Roland's plan, she should have fired at least 5 or 6 shots. There was no dazzling flame or deafening roar. It was an unbreakable rule that the amount of ammunition was equal to the amount of light. However, there was a price to pay to fill in more ammunition, and the firing speed would be affected first. Based on the fixed amount of ammunition, the larger the warhead, the greater the resistance, the heavier the warhead, the slower the firing speed. In order to hit the senior demon as much as possible, Lauren gave up the advantage of the supercaliber charge. The grenade was almost the same size as the 40mm barrel, and the front part was conical to reduce the friction with the air. From the results of the shooting, the bullet performed well in terms of speed and stability. Although it was much smaller than the Iron Fist, it was more than enough to deal with a 10mm armor plate. The thickness of the Iron Fist was equivalent to that of the demon's stone pillar. Do you think this weapon can hit a senior demon? Roland looked at Pasha and the others. Well. Alxia was the first to speak. There are strong and weak senior demons, just like there are transcendents and transcendents. It's hard to generalize. If it's a speed-oriented demon or a magic slayer, to be honest, the probability of hitting it head-on is not high. Even if it sees the grenade being fired, it's enough time for them to dodge. But, she paused for a moment and then raised her voice. This is definitely an epoch-making weapon, Your Majesty, because it has leveled the gap between the demons and the mortals, and made it possible to win with numbers. It's not an exaggeration to praise it with any words. Yes, Pasha said with a smile. Mortals can also hurt a senior demon, which is almost unimaginable in the past. If such a weapon existed in the Tequila era, Lady Natalia would probably wake up laughing in her dreams. And I have a way to greatly increase its accuracy. Alxia waved her main tentacle. Oh. Roland looked at her. What is it? Let the gods punishment witches use it. Alxia's voice was full of excitement. Only Transcendence can keep up with a senior demon. If you shoot close to the demon's face, no matter how strong the enemy is, it's impossible to dodge the shot. Don't worry. Since it's an individual weapon, of course, everyone should have one. Roland smiled. Of course, the gods' punishment witches are no exception. The next test was to further increase the power while maintaining the firing speed and manufacturing cost, he thought to himself. Also, they should not waste the super caliber bullets. Although the senior demons could run fast, the abnormal parasites could too. Considering that they would have to invade the demon cities sooner or later, it was not impossible to encounter the spider demons in the streets. Therefore, it was necessary to develop new bullets in advance. While Roland was thinking, his guards suddenly brought him a piece of news. Chapter 11:20. In the office of the Lord's castle. 2 hours had passed since Sean had finished his report. All in all, the trip had been very successful. Zoe and Betty had not only brought back the ancient relics, but had also looted the treasury on Archduke Island with the help of the captured gods' punishment warriors. All kinds of jewelry and ornaments were piled up in a cabin. The foundation of the Church of Hermes had been completely destroyed. No matter which noble in the kingdom of Wolfheart occupied Archduke Island, they would not have any connection with the church. Cajun Fells bade farewell to the captain of the guards as soon as he disembarked and returned to the hotel with his disciples. It seemed that he could not wait to start writing a new script. Farina and Joe, members of the church, were sent to prison to await trial by the Grey Castle Security Bureau. I'll leave them to you, Roland said softly, tilting his head. Nightingale pinched his shoulder to show that she understood. So the rumored treasure, the magic ceremony cube, is in this lead box. Roland looked at the grey box beside Sean's feet. According to the trader Hagrid's description, it was the size of a palm and looked like a cube made of polished stone. Considering the danger of strong radiation, Roland had asked the rescue team to prepare for it before he set off. Yes, I took care of it as you ordered and didn't let anyone else touch it except for Zoe and Betty, Sean replied. But before I put it in the lead box, I noticed something unusual. What was it? Your Majesty, do you remember the reason why Lorenzo decided to send Hagrid to the Cage Mountain to gather information? Roland thought for a moment and said, is it because the treasure that hasn't changed in the past 100 years emitted a blue light? Yes, Sean said, nodding. When Miss Zoe brought back the magic ceremony cube, she said something that caught my attention. She said, the blue light seems to be changing. I took a few more glances and found that the light was pointing at me like a compass. To be honest, I was so scared that I almost dropped the Rubik's Cube. This was simply like listening to a ghost story. Roland also felt goosebumps in his heart, but his expression didn't change as he said, did you find the reason in the end? Probably. Sean took something out of his pocket and handed it to the mahogany table. After I calmed down, I thought that an ancient relic wouldn't react to an ordinary person. Something must have gone wrong. After some investigation, I found that it wasn't pointing at me, but at this coin. It was a highly enriched uranium coin, which was used to search for ore sources. After Ozima returned to Neverwinter, she handed it over to Sean. In other words, the Rubik ceremony cube was glowing because it sensed the uranium coin? This was really interesting. Roland pondered for a moment before saying, I understand. You've completed this mission very well. You can go and rest first. Yes, Your Majesty. After Sean excused himself, Nightingale appeared from the mist. She walked up to the lead box and looked around it. Why, did you find anything? This is a magic artifact, Nightingale confirmed. It looks like an unpolished stone, but it's definitely not that simple. In the mist, I saw a light similar to a magic cyclone, just like the magic core in the hands of the tequila witches. Sure enough, Roland thought. The influence of magic power on this world was probably more profound than he had imagined. Unfortunately, from the information they had gathered so far, there was a huge difference in the research and application of it among the various races. Without analytical methods, it was very difficult to carry out a systematic study. However, he also knew that an empirical formula was still a formula, and it was better than nothing. Just like before the emergence of classical mechanics, people still created all kinds of tools through observation and practice. Now that there was a new object of observation, naturally, he had to explore it. Let's go to the third border city, Roland said. I wonder if Celine has prepared a special laboratory. In any case, this cursed relic should not be left in the castle until it was absolutely safe. Why did you come back? Pasha quickly came up to Roland when he entered the underground hall. Is there something wrong with the new weapon? Roland shook his head. I asked Celine to expand the cave. How's the progress? Ah, are you talking about the metal chamber? Except for the elevator, the other parts are basically completed. She's in the chamber now. Do you want to go and have a look? After getting a positive answer, Pasha bent her main tentacle and said, Please follow me. A week ago, when Roland decided to send God's punishment witches to the kingdom of Wolfheart, he also asked Celine to start preparing the necessary facilities for the research, a fully enclosed laboratory hidden deep underground with shielding functions. If the magic ceremony cube could really emit high-energy rays as he thought, it would undoubtedly be very risky to test it on the ground. Considering that the effect of Nana's treatment on radiation disease was still unknown, it was better to be cautious. Following the original carrier, Roland roughly told her what had happened in the kingdom of Wolfheart. I see, Pasha said with a smile. Leaving it to Celine is indeed the best choice. Whether it's the study of magic or the dismantling and restoration of relics, she's the best in the Quest Society. After switching to this body, her skills have improved by more than one level. I don't dare to say for others, but Celine is probably the only one who chose to merge with a carrier before Tequila showed any signs of defeat. Roland thought. Ha! Nightingale revealed a disgusted expression. You mean, she prefers tentacle sarcomas to her original body? If that's helpful for exploring the secrets of the world. Pasha shook her tentacles. When she was still in the Quest Society, she always complained that she didn't have enough hands and that her body got tired too quickly. If she had mastered the soul transfer technology at that time, it's hard to say what she would have done. After walking for about 7 minutes, they came to the end of the tunnel and saw a vertical hole in front of them. This is the entrance, but it will take a few days to install the elevator. Pasha lowered her main tentacle. Please climb up. Is this the only way to go down? Nightingale looked at the countless wriggling tentacles and seemed a little afraid. This is the fastest way, Pasha comforted her. Don't worry. Although the tentacles are small and flexible, they are actually quite flexible and won't break when you step on them. Roland took a deep breath and climbed up the carrier's head along the main tentacle. He thought it would be as creepy as falling into a swarm of worms, but in fact, it was as soft as a carpet. When Nightingale also climbed up, Pasha moved into the hole and quickly slid down to the bottom. Chapter 11:21. Although the laboratory was designed by him, Roland was still shocked when he saw it with his own eyes. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. In the pitch-black underground, the stone of lighting lit up the path ahead. The surrounding stone walls were covered with 2-meter square lead plates, forming a regular space the size of a basketball court. The smooth and even lead baffles were interlaced with each other. Cold light shone on them, making them look lifeless. However, it was precisely this kind of room that gave birth to a formless beauty. This was the beauty of the industrial age. If we don't win the battle of divine will, this place will become an ancient ruin after a few hundred years, right? Roland whispered. Moreover, it was a relic with a completely different style from the underground civilization and the demons. The fine abrasion marks on the lead plate were the marks left by humans. Perhaps so. Pasha gently put them down. But I have never believed as much as I do now. I believe that mankind will go to the end. I think so too. Roland smiled and walked into the laboratory. The entire room was divided into 2 areas, the operating area and the observation area. The 2 areas were separated by a concrete wall that was nearly half a meter thick, and the walls were also covered with lead plates. The glass placed in the center of the wall was specially made by Lucia. Lead oxide was added to the conventional ingredients. Limited by the level of technology, the transparency of the lead glass was far less bright than that of the later generations, but at least it allowed people to clearly see the situation on the opposite side. You have come, Your Majesty. A main tentacle stretched out from behind the door of the operating area, followed by Celine's huge body. Her appearance was like a scene from a horror movie, but the bolts and rulers wrapped around her auxiliary tentacles quickly weakened the feeling. I heard Pasha's message when I was installing the last lead plate. Had Zoe and the others brought back the ancient relics? It's in this box. Roland placed the lead box on her main tentacle and walked into the operating area to check it carefully. How is it? This place is arranged according to your requirements. Celine raised her antennae. But is it really necessary to do this? If the curse was just a kind of light, wouldn't an ordinary wall be enough? Just in case. If it were as I supposed, the light it emitted would not only be invisible to the naked eye, but would be exceedingly penetrating. Ordinary walls can indeed block it, but they need to be at least a few meters thick. He turned around and looked at the 2 ancient witches. So, don't act on your intuition. Even if the original carrier has an extremely high resistance, before you completely understand the nature of the magic cube, you have to follow the rules and conduct experiments. Because the ionizing radiation would destroy the DNA structure of the cell, it would lead to the appearance of replication barriers. Therefore, the damage to tissues with fast metabolism was the greatest. Organs like the heart and brain, which would not be replaced once they matured, were much more resistant to ionizing radiation. Judging from the lifespan of the original carriers, which easily spanned several hundred years, their aging cycle was astonishingly long. In theory, they should also have a certain degree of immunity to radiation. This was also the reason why Roland asked Celine to do the test. Celine laughed. You look a lot like the president of the Quest Society. Don't worry, the Quest Society has always followed strict rules. I won't be careless. Roland nodded and said, then let's begin. The isolation door was closed, leaving Celine alone in the operating room. The first rule of the experiment was that when studying the magic ceremony cube, all exits must be sealed. Except for the operator, the others could only wait in the observation area. Through the lead glass, Roland saw Celine open the box and take out the magic cube. Just as Sean had said, a faint blue light flowed through the cracks of the stone and pointed at the coin on the test bench. Interesting. Celine looked at it for a while. This thing hasn't been activated, right? The isolation wall blocked the sound transmission. Roland concentrated and replied in his mind, according to Sean, the Earl of Archduke Island still had close contact with it after it emitted the blue light, so I think it's just an indicator. I see. Celine grabbed the Rubik's Cube and countless tentacles surged towards it, instantly wrapping it into a ball. What is she doing? Nightingale asked. Sensing. Pasha explained, tentacles are far more sensitive than human fingers. Not only do they have all the senses of touch, but they can also smell. They can also remember every bump and depression on the surface of an object. A magic genius like Celine could even construct the outline and details of the magic ceremony cube in her mind. Unfortunately, this part was described by the carrier's mind, so normal people would not be able to understand it. Can you see what she's sensing? Roland was a little surprised. If she's willing to share it. Pasha reached out a tentacle and pointed at the glass. Now the magic cube is in front of me. This was such a convenient ability, just like a mental network. He used to think that it could only transmit consciousness, but he did not expect that it could also share three-dimensional images. The length and width of the magic ceremony cube are almost the same, about 15 centimeters. The inside is hollow, and I can feel the cracks. It doesn't look like a hole. Celine suddenly said. What do you mean? It looks like it's made of several stones. Wait. I think I found the mechanism. As soon as Pasha finished speaking, the entangling tentacles dispersed, and a small opening appeared on the back of the magic cube, as if the entrance to a treasure that had been buried for many years had finally been opened. Amazing, Roland could not help but exclaim. You figured it out so quickly. It had been nearly 100 years since the magic ceremony cube was lost among the people, and the previous owners must have played with it a lot. However, according to the records, no one had noticed that it was actually not a complete stone. I told you it would be okay to give it to her, Pasha said with a smile. The magic core of the underground civilization was pieced together bit by Celine from a broken state. Your Majesty, I have an idea. Celine put her tentacle into the small opening and said, that's why it only reacted to this coin. You said that the magic cube had been silent for many years. At first, I thought it was because it had run out of magic power, like the magic stone or the sigil. But after getting the real thing, you should have noticed that there is still magic power in it. So, what this thing lacks, is it the element that makes the glory of the sun that you mentioned? That's what I thought. Roland curled up the corner of his mouth. You can try to put the coin in. But it may activate the magic cube, so you have to be prepared. Got it. Celine moved behind a baffle on one side of the test bench. It was an arc-shaped lead block with 4 holes in the center for the tentacles to pass through. It was like a huge shield with an observation hole. After she threw the coin into the magic cube, the opening immediately closed, and the light at the top turned dark red. Bingo! Roland and Nightingale looked at each other excitedly. Chapter 1122. Record 12th, the first day of the experiment. According to His Majesty's request, a hazard test was conducted. 30 roosters were placed evenly around the experiment table, one of which was directly illuminated by the red light. The exposure time was 5 minutes. The target rooster reacted violently, rushing left and right in the cage, while the other roosters showed no reaction. There was a slight burnt smell at the scene. After the exposure, a slight burn mark was found on the fallen feathers of the target rooster. But such a small damage was not enough to cause the feathers to break, it should have fallen off when the target was struggling. The owner of the feather seemed a bit listless, but overall, it was normal. From this point of view, it was less harmful than a torch. Recorder, Celine. 13th, the second day of the experiment. The situation changed. The target rooster began to have diarrhea and wailed, as if it was infected with a demonic plague. The other roosters were normal. His Majesty's expression seemed to be a bit solemn. Today, no new test was conducted. 14th, the third day of the experiment. The target rooster died. After dissection, it was found that the target's body was oozing water, its internal organs were soaked in blood, and its skin was rotting, which was usually a symptom that would only appear one day after the death of an animal. In other words, the red light killed the chicken's skin in advance while the target was still alive? This is very interesting. Thinking about the story of the Temple of the Cursed and Thorn Town, as well as the scenes in the murals, it seems to be the case. The cursed were tortured while seemingly unharmed, until their entire body festered. Although they were still alive, they could only watch their body die bit by bit. This must be a terrible feeling. I take back what I said. Although its lethality was still less than a torch, its method was much stranger. However, His Majesty had his own opinion. He believed that the red light destroyed the self-renewal function of life. On a microscopic level invisible to the naked eye, the body is constantly growing and withering, forming a balance between the two. Therefore, once the growth is stopped, it will lead to a large area of necrosis. This is the essence of the so-called curse. Before there is more evidence to refute this theory, I agree. The microscope is a fascinating invention. Moreover, the information collected from the dream world could also corroborate the observation results, indicating that living organisms were constructed from constantly growing tiny cells. The reason why light could penetrate his body was because the surface of his body was actually full of holes. I felt that I was coming into contact with new territory. Unfortunately, I can't enter the dream world myself. However, it was the raw material for making the glory of the sun, which was rare and difficult to collect. I felt like I was wasting the most precious resource in the world. Besides, the magic power of the magic cube was almost depleted, but like the sigil, it could be replenished at any time. Considering the consumption, this kind of test shouldn't be continued any longer. After the scheduled resistance test is completed, I hope to be able to dismantle it. Roland heaved a sigh of relief and closed the official experiment log. You're looking at it again. Nightingale leaned back on the recliner and said while chewing on a piece of fish, isn't the result obvious? The legendary ancient treasure is just an instrument of torture. Apart from being used to torture captives, it doesn't have any incredible effect. Indeed, just like the murals on the wall, the only purpose of the magic ceremony cube was to torture the enemy. The principle of the magic ceremony cube was similar to that of ionizing radiation, and the uranium coin was the raw material. The difference was that the magic ceremony cube could control the direction of high-energy particles, which was equivalent to directional radiation. Roland suspected that the beam of red light was only used to illuminate the target, similar to a laser sight. It was not the same as the ray itself. After all, it would be too unbelievable to see a neutron beam or a high-energy electron with the naked eye. At this point, the truth about the Temple of the Cursed and the mysterious death of the residents of Thorn Town were finally solved. A civilization that worshipped radioactive elements had created such a device with magic power. The device had a single function. After filling it with high-purity radioactive materials, it could produce a small amount of high-energy particles. As for why the device lost its effect after 100 meters, it probably had something to do with magic power. However, this conclusion made Roland feel a little empty. He had thought that the magic ceremony cube would be more advanced than that, but in the hands of the original owner, it was no different from a whip or a guillotine. This could also be considered the difference between civilizations. Your Majesty. Just then, Sean's voice came from outside the door. The tequila witches have sent us the latest experimental records. Bring it in. According to the plan, this test was the last one. Different animals would be irradiated for the same amount of time to determine the specific ratio of body size and tolerance. After that, all experiments on the magic ceremony cube would be suspended. After all, uranium was not easy to obtain, and there were more important uses for it. Roland opened the notebook that Sean handed to him and picked up the teacup. It was still Celine's handwriting. On the 30th, the 19th day of the experiment. The experiment finally came to an end. The result was clear. The larger the animal, the higher its tolerance to the red light. However, it would take some time to express it in numerical formulas. In addition, there was a little trouble during the experiment. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I wanted to use the remaining raw materials to see if it was lethal, so I aimed it at a fish in a glass tank. After 5 minutes of continuous illumination, the fish were still alive, but the water was already steaming. In other words, it was not as lethal as boiling water. If I continued to irradiate it, the magic ceremony cube would boil the water first and then kill the fish. Maybe it could be used to make soup. Puff! Roland suddenly spat out the tea he had just drunk. What's wrong? Nightingale looked at him in surprise. I forgot about that. Roland murmured. He had been thinking about all kinds of advanced possibilities and applications, but he had neglected the most basic point. The nature of the ray was a kind of energy transmission, which could be used to boil water. Chapter 11:23. Roland immediately picked up the phone to the third border city and said, "Tell Celine not to dismantle the magic ceremony cube." "I'll be right there." Yes, Your Majesty." The messenger on the other side of the phone obviously did not understand what was going on, but he still followed the order. "Take me to the border city," Roland turned to Nightingale and said, "as fast as you can." "Got it." The latter smiled and grabbed his hand. "You may feel a little dizzy." Then the two of them instantly disappeared into the mist. 5 minutes later. Ah! Roland appeared in the underground hall with his hand covering his mouth. He had to admit that Nightingale had become much more familiar with her ability than when they first met. Traveling in the black and white world was like surfing. The waves were overwhelming, but Celine could use them to move forward. Her movements were like floating clouds and flowing water. It was like a work of art. Roland, however, did not enjoy it so much, especially the changing contours that blurred the boundary between flat and three-dimensional. The feeling of the world turning upside down was 100 times more exciting than riding a roller coaster. "Finally, we're here." Nightingale smiled and patted him on the back. "What's wrong, Your Majesty?" Celine slowly descended from the top of the cave with a lot of tools in her hands. "I heard you were looking for me." Looking at the hammers, saws, and files on Celine's tentacles, Roland breathed a sigh of relief. "It seems that we made it. But why are there halberds and axes among the tools? Is she going to chop the magic cube into powder? Where is the ancient artifact?" "It's still in the underground laboratory." He took a deep breath and asked, "Can you replicate it?" Celine was obviously stunned. "Are you sure? Wasn't that thing completely useless?" "Maybe it's not useless." Roland briefly explained his idea. "The biggest drawback of steam power is that the fuel is too heavy. If there is a way to replace it with the Rubik's Cube, it is likely to bring a new round of revolution in industrial production." An efficient and powerful power source was always the core of the industry. Whether it was used in manufacturing, power generation, or equipment, it could cause a qualitative change. Of course, it would not be easy to take this step. The relationship between the traditional boiler and the Rubik's Cube was not a simple one. After switching to a new heating method, the thermal circulation and interaction system, control system, and maintenance would all change accordingly. Before success, he might have to face countless failures, but this was worth the effort to try. Boiling water. "I see." Celine thought for a moment and then said awkwardly, "But, if I don't carefully explore the internal structure, I'm afraid it will be difficult for me to replicate it. After all, it involves magic, and you don't allow me to dismantle it." "Ahem, I mean, don't disassemble it like it's trash." Roland coughed twice. "If it's for imitation purposes, it's certainly not a problem to carefully dissect it." "Is there any careless disassembly?" Celine said in surprise. Then she sounded a little aggrieved. "When I was in the Quest Society, I had to be punished for damaging any relic. But from the time I joined the society until the fall of Tequila, I was never punished. Lady Natalia even praised me personally, saying that I had a pair of naturally skillful hands. If I was careless in my research, the core instruments in the hall would have been destroyed long ago." Faced with this boastful excuse, Roland looked at the tools in her hand doubtfully. You used to use them to disassemble relics? These? Celine was startled. How is that possible? Didn't you give the sisters new weapons and equipment? It turns out that no one uses those swords, spears, and axes. Instead of letting them rust in the warehouse, it's better to use them to make other things. I happen to be short of a few bookshelves in my database. By the way, why did you use these abandoned weapons as research tools? Nightingale suddenly covered her mouth and turned her head away. Judging from her slightly trembling shoulders, it seemed that she was having a hard time holding it in. Roland could not help feeling a little embarrassed. No, I thought you would go crazy when it comes to things related to magic power. It must be Pasha again, Celine said, using her main tentacles to support the huge tumor. She can't tell the difference between enthusiasm and interest. A real explorer needs to be clear-headed and meticulous, as well as precise and controllable actions. Working all night for a few days or muttering to herself in a book, it's not crazy at all. Seeing that Celine could not stop talking, Roland quickly interrupted her. Let's not talk about that. Are you sure that you can replicate the magic ceremony cube after you figure out its structure? Celine returned to normal when it came to business. It depends on the complexity of the magic ceremony cube. Although I can't be 100% sure, the possibility is not low. The magic ceremony cube has an obvious feature, which is that it can be manipulated without magic power, which means the biggest obstacle is no longer there. The most difficult thing to replicate is the way to use magic power. Roland immediately realized the key point. You're right. Celine nodded her main tentacles. Humans, demons, the underground civilization, and other races have different ways of using magic power due to the differences in physiology and thinking. Take the magic stone for example. I'm afraid that we will never be able to embed it into our bodies like the demons and gain many abilities. Similarly, if I hadn't transformed into the original carrier, I wouldn't have been able to repair the magic core with my human body. Manipulating the magic ceremony cube without magic power means that I don't have to study what kind of magic cyclones this civilization had and how they used them. To be honest, without enough information, it's almost impossible to overcome this obstacle. But now, as long as I can make it exactly the same as the original, I can make the magic power have the same effect. Of course, this was still very difficult in the tequila era. Now that I can adjust the magic core at will, the situation is much better. Celine paused for a moment. But besides that, there's another obstacle that I need to solve. What is it? Materials. She said, I have been studying the Rubik's Cube these days, and I found that although it looks like a stone, it is not made of stone. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe it's the bones of an alien race, or the solidification of something else. Anyway, I need more samples. But you said that the Temple of the Cursed has been empty for many years. Even this relic's whereabouts are only known by chance. So, it's still unknown whether I can use replacement materials to achieve the same effect. Materials. Roland muttered. Maybe there's another place where I can find something similar. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.